It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Happy Saturday night, everybody. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. 3 hours of fun for you tonight, taking you up until 2 a.m. here in the East. Alongside my partner, Dylan Balsamo, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Andrew Posadas will be along with the headlines and other fun stuff throughout these 3 hours. Alex Woles, as always, is our producer. Glad to have you with us. Dylan, great to be with you again, man. How are you?
Jimmy, it is always a pleasure to see you and Andrew and Alex and to have all of us here as a group of friends is just wonderful. And you know what? Someone's recording it and people are going to hear it. That makes it that much better.
Does make it that much better for sure. And we got a lot to get into tonight. Mets, Yankees, basketball, hockey, football. We're running the gamut tonight. There's a ton of stuff for us to talk about based on what has happened in the last week. But as I think we have to do tonight, Dylan, we're going to start our discussion with rats. The New York Mets last night defeated the Arizona Diamondbacks 5-4. Francisco Lindor hit a 2-run home run, his first home run at Citi Field as a Met. And much of the discussion after the game was based on a alleged fight that went on in the tunnel. At least we thought it was a fight based on context clues and things we did or didn't see on television. And this was much of the media's attention. This was much of social media's attention. Dylan, you were there. You covered the game. I have covered my share of surreal Mets games back in my day. So I have to ask you, what was that like being at Citi Field with everything that transpired between the beginning and end of the game and after the game last night?
Well, here's the thing. It was a weird game from the beginning. It was just kind of a weird night at the ball. There was a weird air in the ballpark. Last night was the release of the Polar Burger, Pete Alonso's new burger.
Was that good, by the way, before you move on?
It was a cheeseburger, crab sauce, caramelized onions. It was fantastic. But anyways, like David Peterson had a rough start last night, only threw 1 2/3 innings. So it was a weird kind of vibe at the ballpark, you might say. And then the weird thing about what went on with McNeil and Lindor, allegedly, is that is the closest I'll ever be to the New York Mets in terms of coverage. I was in the press box. And yet I found out about what apparently was going on from, like, you texted me, my mom texted me, because you guys were watching the game. These were angles that I didn't get to see. I was way up in the press box. And then, apparently SNY's team with Gary, Keith, and Ron, who we love, was talking about this alleged thing of the rundown at the clubhouse, and it was very strange to not even really understand what's happening. And everyone in the press box, all those names we know, we were all kind of having the same feeling. And then come the post game, when the explanation comes of a rat or a raccoon. I was glad my Zoom didn't have the camera on, because I was kind of giggling. It was really something.
You were laughing through the mask, right?
Yeah, of course I had the mask on, but I find you can usually tell when people are laughing through masks. But it was so strange.
It certainly was. And in case you don't know the entire story, basically in the 7th inning, there was a ground ball. There was a slight mix-up between Lindor and McNeil. Not the first time it's happened this season. Lindor had to make a long throw across the diamond. It didn't wind up being made. It didn't cost the Mets, but it seemed like factions, one side for McNeil, one side for Lindor. Worth noting, by the 9th inning, Lindor was in the on-deck circle for McNeil, and he was pumping him up and pounding him on the chest in a good way. So I think whatever may have happened has probably been resolved. But we're talking about this rat and raccoon stuff, and you're hearing it secondhand. But I feel like we may as well hear it firsthand. So this was Francisco Lindor's explanation of what took place post-game. This is courtesy of SNY. This is what Francisco Lindor had to say when we were all asking, was there a fight between the Mets middle infield starters last night? And this is how Francisco Lindor explained it.
Yeah, I was mad on the field because I didn't make the play, so that's why it probably looked like I was angry. And then Jeff, obviously because I was going against him, whether it was a rat or a raccoon, of course he's going to be mad.
He's going to be mad because you were debating whether it was a rat or a raccoon?
Yeah, man.
So an imaginary hitting coach and now an imaginary rat infestation, and it's only May 8th. The Mets, I tell you, the Mets are insane, but this is some new stuff. I'm waiting for a Steve Cohen tweet about this. This is what I'm waiting for. If I get the Steve Cohen tweet, we have bingo on this story.
That's the strange part is I'm shocked, when we're recording this at what is now 11:06 in the morning on Saturday. There hasn't been a Steve Cohen tweet, and that confuses me considering this all happened 12 hours ago. It is incredibly strange. It's been he has gotten himself out of the gate in a very strange way as the owner of the New York Mets, particularly in the last month and a half of him owning the team. But last night might have taken the cake as one of the strangest Mets games I know of or particularly have seen.
If you thought the Mets were going to stop being weird with new ownership, you're wrong, because they remain very strange. I will say this. I wanted to get this in about, Ratgate here. So, game last night was very exciting. Francisco Lindor hits the home run to tie the game in the 7th. They win the game in the 10th. Pat Mazeika, in his first Citi Field plate appearance, with a 10-foot walk-off, a little dribbler up the line. And all the questions post-game were about the altercation, the rat, the raccoon. And I get it. It's a story. And it certainly looked like Jeff McNeil had a black eye under his, around his, I think it was his left eye. So I get that you have to ask about that. It was very clear to me, though, after a couple of questions, that he was sticking to his rat story. Like, he was not going off that. And I was just, I don't even know if I was necessarily surprised. I was just a little disappointed that after a game that has so much you could ask about, right? So many things happened. By the way, Mets bullpen last night was outstanding in relief of David Peterson. Saved their bacon, both for last night and tonight's game. But after everything that happened, all of it becomes about the rat, which, Lindor's not giving it up. McNeil's not giving him up. Luis Rojas did not go along with the company line, but okay, that's fine, whatever. But I don't know. I get why you have to ask about it. I was just kind of slightly dismayed that it seemed like people were just following up, finding different ways to ask the same thing, and it just wasn't going to happen. But I don't know if that's the vibe that you got when you were on that post-game Zoom.
Well, no, that was certainly the energy, and I won't lie, I wanted to know every single detail of this story, and personally, I didn't get a chance to ask a question last night, but if I had, I talked to you about this, I would have gone with him on it, because most of the questions were in the vein of, is this really true? Do you expect people to believe this? No, ask questions about the rat. How big was the rat? Why did you think it was a rat? Why did Jeff McNeil think it was a raccoon? But in terms of the altercation, it's understandable why the two of them might have, because the two of them have had a very rough go of it the last few weeks. Lindor's been on a skid, and McNeil is, I've noticed this just from watching games, but also being at the games, is he is the only guy who can tattoo a ball and still ground out to second base. He just hits the ball hard constantly, and he just hasn't been getting his hits through lately. So that's incredibly frustrating. So you'd imagine this is a tough time for the two of them. but you think after a very triumphant win last night, especially you talk about the bullpen, Robert Gazelman, Jacob Barnes, all these different guys who came in last night, Aaron Loop, Edwin Diaz. And after Lindor is finally able to get a home run at Citi Field, you think maybe this was the end of such tension.
Wrong. Definitely not. I mean, everybody's focused on it. It is what it is. I get the sense that the guys in that clubhouse just don't care. Like, they're just going to tell their story, and that is what it is. But I mean, Dylan, so much to get into on this show. Mets, Yankees played the Astros this week. Great series, by the way. We'll get into that a little bit later. Headlines. We don't get to talk a lot of hockey on this show. But the New York Rangers this week had more exciting stuff happen after they were eliminated from playoff contention than maybe any team in the history of the NHL. So we'll get into the Rangers as well. We got basketball. We also got a couple guests along the way. Talking to Nelson Figueroa at about 11:35, so about 25 minutes from now. We'll talk to him, longtime Mets analyst, former Mets pitcher, and now does the Amazing But True podcast for the New York Post, a fitting name given that it's about the New York Mets. And Dylan, what I'm looking forward to, and maybe you'll wind up asking the question, as a fellow pitcher, watching Jacob deGrom, watching really, I think all the pitching around the league right now, really looking forward to that discussion with him as somebody who had pitched and done so successfully for a number of years.
Absolutely, it's a good time to be a pitcher. I saw one person tweet last night. It was Rob Manfred wanted to speed up the game, and what he accidentally did was put us back into the dead ball era. Such a pitcher era right now, because Jacobs has been out of his mind good lately. We had two really deep no hit bits last night. One of them went the whole way. Miley's bid with the Reds. It is, the craft of pitching is cool again, which is very exciting. And that seems to come in spurts. It's every decade and a half or so. There was the last, I would say, was the Pedro Martinez, Roger Clemens era. It was really when pitching was cool last. And now we're back in an era where Jacob deGrom leads the way, and Garrett Cole, and on the other side of the city, and all these guys who were just so exciting to watch. But specifically in deGrom's case, it's outstanding.
It's interesting you bring up that 90s era, kind of late 90s with Pedro and Roger. What Pedro did in 99 still blows my mind in the steroid era with everybody juiced, basically. Just incredible stuff. But we've got Nelson coming on 11:35. We have Mike Moriarty, WFUV class of 2005, coming on at 1 a.m. That is a preview of our Off the Air podcast series. Had a very nice conversation with Mike the other day. He is a game reporter for Fox Sports Radio, AP, others. And most importantly for our purposes, a WFUV alum. And then at the end of our show, we're going to do something I'm really looking forward to. We're going to discuss a bunch of things from the fan perspective, because I think sometimes on this show, I don't know how you feel about this, Dylan. It's not a criticism or anything, but we do the best we can to be passionate and impart our fandom, and we do that. But I do think sometimes, at least for me, I occasionally find myself getting a little jaded with certain things, and I can't speak for anybody else, but I root for my teams, and quite frankly, if you knew all the teams I rooted for, you'd say it was very easy to get jaded. But you nonetheless sometimes can forget, when you host a show as esteemed as this, that it's about being a fan, loving sports, all this stuff. So we're going to go through a bunch of stuff. I don't know if we're going to get to it all, quite frankly, but I'm looking forward to this segment with you, Andrew, maybe even our producer, Alex, as well, depending on how we're doing at the end of the show. But I'm looking forward to that segment, Dylan.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of times, specifically in the sports world, where we will be having heavy debates about a player that's better, or what team's going to make it to the next round of the playoffs, or the justification of the use of the infield fly rule, all these different types of things that in reality really don't matter. And you know what's really interesting about it? Last night, when there was so much speculation about what was going on in the Mets dugout, I had a realization of how weird it was that I was sitting with a group of adults and we were sitting there all wondering what was happening, what all the juice was with another group of adults. It was the most ridiculous realization I've ever had in my life. And, you know, we have all these debates and we get kind of intense about them sometimes. You know, people have been talking a lot about Mike Trout versus Mookie Betts lately, all this different type of stuff. And it's all understandable, but like when it keeps us from enjoying it, it's not even worth it. So it's always fun to look at it from a fan perspective.
Which we will do, not just in that segment, but over the next 3 hours. Taking you up until 2 a.m., talking Mets coming up next. No imaginary animals allowed, though we will make an exception for imaginary people. You'll see what I'm talking about on the other side of this break. Dylan and Jimmy taking you up until 2 a.m. 90.7 FM, Facebook, YouTube. It's a great day for America. We'll be right back.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo with you, taking you up until 2 a.m. 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. Andrew Posadas is going to join us for the headlines and other fun along the way. And Dylan, I've been at hosting One-on-One for a while, as have you, as have Andrew. And as you well know, there are some weeks you do this show and you think, gosh, how am I going to fill 3 hours? What are we going to talk about today? There are some weeks you do this show and you look at the 3 hours and you say, I wish I had 4. This is one of those weeks. We start with the New York Mets, who have had about 4 hours of news dating back to the last show we did last Saturday night. Just a quick recap through what has happened for the Mets this week, by the way. And we'll call this As the Mets Turn. So on Saturday night, after we had recorded last week's episode of One-on-One, they beat the Philadelphia Phillies. Michael Conforto, a late home run. They win that game. And after the game, Pete Alonso and Michael Conforto, namely, gave a lot of credit to a new mental skills coach that the Mets had hired, a guy by the name of Donnie. Now, they asked Pete Alonso, what's Donnie's last name? He had a little bit of a hard time with that one. They came up with Donnie Stevenson. Okay, there's no chance Donnie Stevenson's real, by the way. But Donnie Stevenson. So we're going with Donnie Stevenson. Sunday night, 17 hits against the Phillies. They win that game 8-7. They get a little help from the right field wall railing in Philadelphia to win that game. Once again, Pete Alonso credits Donnie Stevenson, telling them to go in the cage, rip some heaters. On Monday night, they get out to the lead against St. Louis. They lose 6-5. And afterwards, the Mets fired their real hitting coaches, Chili Davis, the lead hitting coach, Tom Slater, the assistant hitting coach. And they bring up a new hitting coach named Hugh Quattlebaum from their minor league system. So he's the new hitting coach now. So that's Monday. Wednesday, they split a doubleheader. Francisco Lindor's slump continues. It's becoming a capital T thing. Thursday afternoon, they beat St. Louis. Marcus Stroman, no, not Marcus Stroman, Taijuan Walker, I beg your pardon there. Pitches a gem, only gives up 1 run. Excellent game from him. Mets leave 17 on base in that game, but they still win because Taijuan Walker was awesome. And then we have Friday night, and we already went through Friday night. That was a lot. A Mets news cycle could really age you, and that's what we have seen this week. But Dylan, I want to start with the firings of Chili Davis and Tom Slater. This is a very big story. It's earlier in the week, but it's huge news. The Mets come up with a fake hitting coach. They fire their real hitting coach. Dylan, I'm curious your reaction to that after what had transpired over the weekend when they had started to hit and didn't give credit to their real hitting coach, instead inventing a mythical character named Donnie Stevenson.
Well, in terms of whether or not Chili Davis needed to go and his assistant Slater, I really don't know how I feel. I've thought about it all week, and I really just I keep going back and forth on things. And it seems like the Mets players weren't a huge fan of the firings either. It's confusing. And here's the thing: you like to think the Donnie Stevenson running gag, because that's really what it is. It's a Muppet Show level running gag. You like to think that has nothing to do with the firing of these 2 Mets employees, but it might. And if it does, that's really, quite frankly, unsettling. There's a lot we don't know about the situation. The Mets organization has said, this is just something that needed to happen. This is just, things needed to be rearranged. And, there's an argument to be made for that, of course. But in the event that Donnie Stevenson has replaced Chili Davis and his team of hitting coaches is something that really unsettles me, quite frankly.
Well, people were joking on Twitter that when they heard that Hugh Quattlebaum was the new coach, there was a segment of people who was saying that Donnie Stevenson sounds more legit than Hugh Quattlebaum. I mean, that's I don't agree with that, but people were saying that.
Here's the thing. First off, I thought this as soon as they brought him up. Hugh Quattlebaum is a wonderful name. I love it very much. I think it's so good you couldn't make it up. Donnie Stevenson sounds like you made it up.
Yeah. I will say also, I've been resisting the urge to call him Q Hoddlebaum, by accident, because it's a bit of a mouthful. I did find it interesting. I was watching Pete Alonso's presser on Tuesday, after they let go of Chili Davis, and he was very emotional about it. He was talking about how he broke down in his locker. He felt, he didn't say this, but it was sort of implied that he felt like, in a way, they had failed Chili Davis by the way they had played in the first month or so of the season. And I find that interesting in the same context that Pete Alonso basically created this fake hitting coach. He was the guy who got up there. I think he referenced Donnie Stevenson 12 times in his press conference And look, I am well aware that this is an evidently absurd conversation that we're having here, but it does have to be had because you have a guy in Pete Alonso who is already, even though he's only in year 3, a very vocal leader in that clubhouse, both in that room, in the front-facing sense of the job, talking to the media. And, he was like very much in on it. And, when they scored the 5 runs on Saturday in Philly, and then they scored the 8 runs on Sunday on Philly, I didn't hear Chili Davis's name once. And unfortunately, I mean, we could talk about how it's a bad look, and if that contributed to Chili Davis's firing, yeah, it is a bad look. But at the same time, if your players are creating an imaginary hitting coach, if they are going to great lengths to talk about this fake person, and I can't imagine Donnie Stevenson is real. But if they're doing that, as absurd as I know I'm sounding right now, if they're doing that, that kind of tells you what you need to know about the real hitting coach and Chili Davis and the direction this offense was headed. And I think, for me at least, that explains the move more than enough. Timing of it's weird. The way they went about it was wrong because the players didn't find out until it was sent out through the media, basically. But the actual decision itself, to me, when I see that, it means it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and you're certainly not wrong in that sense, Jimmy. It's incredibly unfortunate. Something I don't understand is there's a lot of people who make the argument that who blame the Donnie Stevenson practical joke, if you will, which, we're all pretty sure it's just Pete Alonso and a mustache and a big wig. It would be very surprising if it was not that at this point. If that's not,
I'm thinking who's the guy from Eastbound and Down? What was his name? Kenny Powers, I think that was his name. Yeah.
So it's interesting because there's a lot of people who are opposed to Donnie Stevenson, who said, yeah, what happened was they were like, they made up this fictional guy. And the Mets organization was like, well, why are we paying this real guy? Let's let go of him. But the guy you bring in is going to be the same thing anyway. Like the fictional character still exists whether or not you fire the current hitting coach. And every team has a month of the season where they're just not producing offensively. The Mets typically have many months of the season where they don't do that. But, a good team, like the Mets are this year, are going to have a month of the year. The Major League season is about a month too long for an assortment of reasons, but that's one of them. There's going to be a month of the year where you're just not going to hit. The Mets season just so happened to start with that this year, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let's get Andrew. I'd
love to hear
curious what you have to.
Yeah, because initially, fellas, I was just here so I wouldn't get fined. I was going to keep my mouth shut. But I mean, this is just too tasty to not give my 2 cents. Jimmy, I get renegade vibes from this Mets team this season. It's like, the jig is up, the news is out, they find that's the type of vibe I'm getting from this team where they're just so unapologetic. They go about their business how they want. And it's almost like, maybe it's a result of Steve Cohen and having him come in and where the players are like, well, Uncle Steve, he wants us to win by any means necessary. We can do whatever we want. It's almost like the substitute teacher coming in and you just know, all right, we can get away with a little bit more than we could when the big bad Wilpons were up there, owning the team. But it's so interesting. There's not a boring sub story with this team. Hugh Quattlebaum, that sounds like, I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie, The League of Extraordinary Men. Sean Connery, he plays a guy by the name of Alan Quartermain. So it's like, what are we doing here? This is like the biggest catfish in Major League Baseball history. Jimmy, and the crazy part is they're in second place in the National League East. They're a few games away from Philly. They're playing, I think Philly's won 5 straight. But even with this, with Lindor batting under 200, McNeil, I think, is at 236 right now. Well, with everyone struggling and trying to find their footing, they're still in second place. And it's still so early in the season that a month or two from now, the biggest story won't be any rodents. It's going to be the Mets are on fire and they're in first in the NL East. And how far can this team go? So right now, this is just, this is a beat writer's dream, right?
Oh, yeah. The content is unbelievable. It's tremendous stuff. I will say this too, and you bring up a good point about the Mets. Like, they haven't hit some of their offensive numbers until this week. They were down there with like the Detroit Tigers, and we're sitting here talking about them. They're a game over 500. Their front three guys, DeGrom, Stroman, and Walker, have a sub-2 ERA. They've been phenomenal. And they're getting Noah Syndergaard, Carlos Carrasco, Seth Lugo, all back in the coming weeks. Well, allegedly. And you know how these things tend to go with the Mets. But nonetheless, like we're having this conversation about a team that could still very much, go to the playoffs. And you referenced it. I mean, not only Lindor, really they're two high-profile offensive signings. Francisco Lindor, James McCann, have both been, frankly, pretty bad from the plate. And they've been struggling mightily. McCann got booed last night. He got pulled in the fifth in a double switch. Like, there's a lot has gone wrong for the Mets here, and yet they're a game over 500. But it's going to be a weird year. Like, their offense could get hot, and then their pitching could regress. It's going to be like a whack-a-mole type season almost, where maybe not everything gets right at any one given time, but they could still win this division. And I look at the move they made earlier this week with the hitting coaches. Look, the organization obviously changed hands in the offseason. Chili Davis, very much not the new regime's guy. Zach Scott, the GM, was in Boston with Chili Davis, so he knows that Chili Davis is an old school guy. What I just don't understand, and this is like a minor quibble, if he wasn't your guy, I don't know why they didn't just get rid of him in the offseason and let him try to find a job for this year. That's the only thing that I would contest. But look, like, this is a Mets team that is, all things considered, to be a game over 500 the way they've hit, that is fantastic. And I'm, if you just look at the back pages or just the sentiment around this team, it's almost like you wouldn't know that this team is a game above 500. And yet here we are. So I actually think there's reasons for optimism, believe it or not.
I don't disagree with that sentiment at all. There are certainly reasons for optimism, and there's. I think until this Mets franchise wins another World Series, the LOL Mets culture will continue. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In the same way, I think we saw that with the Cubs in 2016. I'm not saying these are the 2016 Cubs. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. We just don't really know yet. But like you've talked about, there's going to be I think whack-a-mole is like the perfect analogy actually for some things are going to click, other things just not at the same time. That's just how it's going to be. I think there's going to hit a point in August when there's going to be at least one point in the year where everything's going to click. And that is when you hope your team gets into the stride of things. But Andrew, that's still a ways away. And until then, you just got to figure out how to win ball games.
No, and I would say this. I think, a lot of traditionalists and purists, they think the Mets have made a mockery with the way they've created Donnie Stevenson, and now this raccoon thing and Lindor and McNeil saying it's a possum, and kind of going with it and just elaborating on it and keeping and just sticking to the story when really everyone thinks that it's baloney. But I would say this. I think for the Mets, ultimately their attitude, this sort of fervor that they're playing with, I think Mets fans are going to embrace it. That's what you want, right? I mean, guys are going to clash. There's a lot of moving parts, guys who have to get acclimated with others. Lindor and McNeil particular, they're, playing right next to each other in the infield. There are going to be times where guys are going to be in disagreement, and there's going to be, growing pains. So I think if you're a Mets fan, you want those things to occur, because at least it shows you that they're passionate. Guys are trying to work it out. You don't want it to be, Jimmy, where we're seeing like the Yankees earlier on, where it just looked like they were lifeless and not giving any effort, just running down to first base. So just seeing the fact that Lindor and McNeil, that they're getting into it, they're both trying to work it out, and guys are trying to help, moderate and help guys get that team chemistry, that rapport. I think it's going to help down the line. And it's something that I think Mets fans will really embrace and kind of take with them. I mean, New York, we're so gritty and grimy, and guys who are just, we want that in our players. And I think Mets fans are going to welcome that.
Yeah. And I think also, like, I'm good with passion. Jeff McNeil's a very passionate guy. I mean, Dylan and I were talking last night when there were no fans in the stands last year and you could hear everything. Jeff McNeil would ground out and he would say certain words going past first base loudly that you could hear that I'm not going to repeat. But he's a very passionate guy. Lindor is a very passionate guy. I don't want my shortstop punching my second baseman in the face, but to a certain extent, like, conflict does work. I don't want guys wandering through the motions. So the fact that they're working hard trying to fix it and occasionally butting heads doing so, to me, is not the end of the world, especially because by the end of it, it seemed like Lindor and McNeil had made up. I just want to throw a brief trivia question out at both of you guys before we move on and talk to Nelson Figueroa. So NL East has been poor this season. I think you guys probably know this one. There's one team in the NL East with positive run differential. Who is it?
Oh, you know what?
Is it the Marlins?
I was
It's
going
the
to.
Marlins.
I knew it.
It's the Miami Marlins.
What do you know?
After a month of the season, and they're third in the division, which goes to show you that run differential isn't everything, but it also shows you that the NL East has been rather bad. Hey, I mean, the division's wide open. You know, it's an attainable division for the Mets to have. I mean, look, somebody's going to get hot and claim it at some point this season, but the Mets can, if they can rip off a bunch of wins here, like they'll be in first place in almost no time. They've also got a bunch of games to make up, which is neither here nor there. But that is what's going on in Mets land. I think we need to talk about it a little more. I want to talk to an expert. Let's talk to Nelson Figueroa, New York Post podcast co-host, former Mets pitcher, longtime Mets analyst across multiple platforms. We'll talk to him next. We'll talk to you guys in a bit. One-on-one till 2 a.m. 90.7 FM, Facebook, YouTube. Nelson Figueroa, other side of this break.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Dylan Balsamo, Jimmy Sullivan with you, and pleased to be joined by Nelson Figueroa, former Mets pitcher. He's now the co-host of the Amazing But True podcast with Jake Brown at the New York Post. Nelson, thanks for being with us tonight. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. And I believe the name of your podcast, Amazing But True, is a great way to describe the night last night in Queens. A lot of, frankly, crazy things going on at Citi Field. We'll get into all things Mets throughout the interview, but I just want to get your takeaways from Friday night, which was a wild night for a lot of different reasons at Citi Field.
Yeah, it should be for all the good reasons. And of course, all it takes is one cut to the dugout or the clubhouse area at the wrong time. You've got controversy now because nobody knows what the actual truth is, unless I'm misinterpreting things. But we heard this fantastic story from Lindor about a possum/rat/raccoon or New York rat. I should, specify because we know how big those get. And you don't know what to believe. look, I've played in the Midwest. I played down in Houston, and the best analogy I could give is I was beating Santana in a ball game when I was pitching against the Mets. And I'm all excited. I'm thinking of the headlines. I get revenge. I get a chance to beat their ace. I come out of the game. Mark Melancon comes in for me in the 7th inning. First batter he faces, David Wright, home run, ties up the ball game. I'm like, oh, well, there goes that. We come up in the bottom of that inning, and Hunter Pence, Santana hits a guy, then Hunter Pence hits a home run. We take the lead. We wind up winning 5-3. And we're at breakfast the next day, me and Melancon, and in the newspaper, the headline in the Houston newspaper says, Mark Melancon earns first big league victory. And I go, wow, what a pretty way to paint it, right? Because in New York, they would have torn him apart. He's not ready for the big time. He came in the big moment and he blew it. No, Mark Melancon earns first big league victory. So I took the newspaper over and we were at breakfast and I gave it to him. I go, hey, keep this headline, because if this is in New York, because remember he came from the Yankees in the Berkman trade. I go, if this was in New York, you would have got ridden already in one of your first outings. So yeah, things are a little different there. So I don't think that's going to fly. It's easy to just tell the truth. It's easy to just say, hey, we had some words, whatever, or just keep it private. Just say, hey, none of your business. A real New Yorker says, none of your business. That would have been even fine. We would have just went with that and said, hey, it was between two teammates. Boom, let it go. But no, they went with the raccoon, possum story, whatever it is, and now everybody's intrigued. Have they not learned anything from Donnie Stevenson? Did we not just learn from the Donnie Stevenson saga? So I'm hoping this team matures a little bit and grows up and realizes that the media is not that dumb. The fans are not that dumb, and you have to be able to have some accountability. At least if you're going to be seen or whatever's been seen on TV, hey, damage control has to be set. We're keeping it in-house. Don't worry about it.
Nelson, again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I hope you were as thoroughly entertained by last night as Jimmy and I very clearly were. You talk about Lindor. There's been a lot of pressure on him lately. The fact that he hasn't been producing offensively as much as you or I or anyone would want him to. Do you think maybe all of this was some kind of result of that pressure getting too much to handle, or do you just think it was just some kind of fluke?
Well, you know what? I would love to say that that's the simple answer, because that's what everybody thinks. And the only one who knows about the pressure that he was feeling was Lindor. You could see it. Body language is everything in this game, right? You know when a guy's confident, when a guy's feeling cocky, and that's why the new let the kids play kind of element to the game, it's fake. It's fake. It's momentary. It's you live in the moment. You're banging your chest. You're flipping the bat. You're look at me, look at me, look at me. A case in point, Ozuna hits a home run last week, down 6-1, hits a home run, and he stops before first base to take a selfie of himself, in his little pose. And you're thinking in your head, the old school guy's going, oh my God, the guy behind him is going to get hit, and the guy behind that guy is going to get hit now, because there's a respect factor that's being lost in the game. So to me, all the kind of fake, momentary showmanship, you're not getting the true essence, the true, the true feelings of what's going on with Lindor. You got to shake it off. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not a money thing because he's got the big contract. It's not a pressure thing. He's played baseball at the highest level before. So to me, it was just, hey, you started out bad. Mike Piazza started out bad, not nearly as bad, but he started out bad with New York when he first came over in the trade. I just felt like, he was struggling, man. He was struggling and wanting to hit the 6-run home run. He's pulling the ball an absurd amount of time right now and trying to pull every single pitch instead of just letting kind of his natural abilities take over and look like he was forcing it. We always say to kids all the time, don't try and hit a home run, because it never happens, right? You wind up overswinging. You wind up trying harder than you should. It's read, react, and then be able to execute whatever game plan you set out. He's done it for years. He's, gotten off the schneid where he got the hit, 1 for 26, hits a home run yesterday, a big home run, which is a good thing. I hope that really starts him having a really good month of May and having an April to forget. That's what you hope it means.
Talking with Nelson Figueroa, former Mets pitcher, co-host of the Amazing But True podcast at the New York Post with Jake Brown. Nelson, as a former pitcher, you've seen what the Mets have been able to do pitching staff-wise, particularly the starting rotation. They've been terrific so far this year. How encouraged do you think Mets fans should be about this, knowing that not only Carlos Carrasco, but also Noah Syndergaard could both be back fairly soon at some point this year, and the guys that have been in the rotation as of now, with the exception of David Peterson last night, an abbreviated start. How encouraging should that be for Mets fans, knowing that the rotation's been good and it's getting reinforcements fairly soon?
Yeah, I think you should feel absolutely, in the best possible condition that you can, even though the offense has been really, really bad for a while now. They're starting to come around finally. You're adding not just some arms, some backup guys. You're adding Noah Syndergaard, who's a number 2. You're adding Carrasco, who can pitch as well as anybody in baseball when he's on the mound. And that's the thing. There's no guy out there that says, oh, you know what? I'm a number 2. I'm a number 4, really. There's no guy that's saying that. So everybody that goes out there feels like they're the number 1 when it's their day. And I love that kind of confidence. All those guys have that, right? So now you have a rotation that gets instantly a huge boost. You don't have to see so much of Joey Casey or Jordan Yamamoto or those guys. Those were added as depth pieces. Those weren't necessarily the guys. Taijuan Walker's been fantastic, more than they bargained for thus far. With him, it's always been a health issue. So knock on wood, we'll make sure that he tries to get through, healthy as possible. You get those 2 pieces back. We're forgetting also Lugo. You're getting a huge piece in the bullpen, a swingman that can now really protect these starters who've had to go maybe a little bit longer than you'd like because you were trying to protect the bullpen because you kept having to use the same 3 arms over and over again because it was tight ball games because the team's not scoring any runs. What I'm excited most about, again, is when those 3 pieces come back and it's plenty of time before the trade deadline. And now you're going to be able to see where the new regime and the new Mets ownership and management, are they going to be able to put together kind of what happened in 2015? Because I don't think I look at this team already and know it's better than the 2015 team on paper early on. When they got all those guys on, they got the Kelly Johnsons and the Uribes and, of course, the Cespedes move, and the Tyler Clippard, and they got those other pieces. That's what made them an instant contender. This team's a contender right now. And now you're going to be adding, all-star caliber arms, all 3 of those guys, and then you're going to be able to go and see how deep exactly are those pockets of Uncle Stevie's.
Nelson, while we're on the topic of pitching, I want to ask you about Jacob deGrom because, with the exception of the fact that he didn't get to pitch this past week, looks like he's going to be back very soon. He has been, to use an old term, in the zone. He just seems to be as there as he has been over the last 2 Cy Young Award-winning full seasons. So let me ask you, from pitcher to pitcher, what is it about his stuff right now that makes him so undefeatable?
It's hard to even put into words what we're watching right now, because normally, a guy, as we've seen with Trevor Bauer, you talk about a guy turning a corner, right? And then you want to see how long they can hold on to it. There were many, many, many pitchers who seemed like they turned a corner and they're at the peak, the pinnacle of what they could do, and it kind of fizzles out because the league figures them out. The league understands how they like to work. They pitch a little backwards. To see what he's done over his last 80 plus starts, 80. That number just boggles the mind, where he's putting up this 2 point, barely a 2 ERA, and goes out there with no run support and never cries, never says, woe is me. He stands there in front of the media at the end of the game, giving up 1 run. Yeah, I should have given up a run. Then I would have got a no decision. It's my job not to give up any runs. And he's kind of figured it out. He's figured out what pitching is. Pitching at that high of a level is about preventing runs, run prevention. And he kicks it into an even bigger gear when there's men on base, right? that when they rarely get on, he kicks it into another gear still. I don't understand how he has so many gears. And I've said this ad nauseum, and anybody who's heard me get interviewed about Jacob, he is an F1 driver in Monaco, where he's downshifting, upshifting, the straightaways. He's the fastest of the fast. He can hook the curves. He knows the game plan and the route inside and out on every single team, because he never has to change anything. It doesn't matter what hitter is up there. He's the best pitcher on the planet. Like, he's not pitching to a hitter's weaknesses. He's always pitching to his strengths. And that's what's different about him. He has the ability to pitch to all 4 quadrants of the strike zone, up, down, in, and out, with just his fastball. But he can do it also with his changeup on both sides of the plate. He can do it with a slider that's 94 miles an hour. And when you have that kind of touch and feel, but then you have the velocity, it would be like if you took Greg Maddox's ability to throw strikes and make the ball move, and you married it to, Randy Johnson's type fastball. If those could ever match, that's Jacob deGrom. And that's what he's doing, and making it look so easy out there, because every time you come up, he's got a different out pitch to get you out with.
Truly incredible stuff. I do want to switch gears a bit, get your reaction to some of the news earlier in the week with the Mets. It feels like a very long time ago, but earlier this week, they got rid of Chili Davis, the hitting coach. Tom Slater, the assistant hitting coach as well, brought up Hugh Quattlebaum from the minor leagues. He'll be the hitting coach for the rest of the season. What was your reaction to that news? And it seems like the front office and ownership kind of shaking things up with an offense that had been struggling for the first month of the season, but had just been finally starting to hit, and then they get rid of the hitting coach.
Oh, absolutely. I think, ownership would have probably said, if they could, hey, we still have the receipt on the Lindor deal at $342 million. I don't know if I'm going to pay that for a 160 hitter, but that's not what you do in baseball, right? So you have to do a shakeup. And it was, I don't know if I think from a fan perspective, I'm proud of what they did, because something had to give, right? And whoever you blame it on, or whatever you say about philosophy, old school, new school, I'm not buying that. Baseball's baseball, right? They prepare and they game plan. They've done it for centuries now. They prepare and they game plan, knowing the opponent, and with all this information that we have now, there's video constantly playing. These guys are prepared as can be before the game. They're flipping toss and throwing pitches to these guys, and they're working with the guys that are struggling. They're keeping the guys that are doing well, making sure that they were maintaining, that they're keeping them in the zone, kind of thing. So they're doing their job. It is a thankless job, because remember, these guys are preparing guys to fail. Don't suck so much today. That's basically what they're doing, because they're going to fail 7 out of 10 times and still be an all-star. That boggles the mind. That there's a coach whose sole responsibility is to help them not suck so much. And the difference is 1 hit, right? Because if they're batting 200, this is the worst coach on the planet. They get 1 more hit, they're the best coach on the planet. But what I saw was there was a respect factor that was lost. Because with all that work that they're doing, and they know they're struggling as a team, they know they're struggling as an offense, they know those guys are working their butt off to try and help them. And yet when they did have success, they gave the credit to Donnie Stevenson. And instead of saying, hey, Chili Davis has been busting his ass with me. Hey, Slater's been working with me extra, staying later, coming earlier. Instead of saying those things that show an appreciation for the people that are putting in the work with you, you make up these fictitious names and these people that don't exist. And what happens is the respect factor gets lost, because if you're not going to give acknowledgement, then it's as if you graduated from high school, and instead of thanking your parents in your speech, you go ahead and thank your imaginary friend. That's what I saw. And I saw that once that respect factor was lost, and I'm not buying that they were fired a week ago and they just waited for COVID protocols. We already know you can get a rapid test in 15 minutes and know if somebody is positive or not. The guys get called up all the time and don't have to wait a week before they're, put on the team. So I'm not buying that excuse. I am of the mind that those 2 games back to back in Philadelphia, where they started Donnie Diesel in it and not talking about Chili Davis and Slater, basically made management go, who are they talking about, and why are we even paying these other guys if they're not getting the job done?
So Nelson, you mentioned, Donnie Diesel, if you will, the Ratter Raccoon story, all these crazy things that are going on. And you mentioned specifically earlier a lack of maturity in some ways. So let me ask you, where, in your opinion, is the line between players just having fun and something that is borderline disrespectful?
When it's almost as if they're laughing at the media and the fans by having their little inside joke. If you have an inside joke, have an inside joke, but don't make it public. Don't make it public. And in this day and age, people will find out. People will search. That's all people do now. I hate using the term trolls on the internet, but that's all the trolls do. That's just what they live for. It's not just the beat reporters anymore. It's not just the beat guys that are in the clubhouse. It can take anybody who's, around the team, knows somebody on the team. They get a little bit of inside information, and now it's all over the internet. I mean, it's a much different day and age. And I used to say that about stuff off the field. I used to tell players all the time, be careful of your surroundings. There's somebody with a camera on their phone at all times. You have to be aware of your surroundings. Right now, they're in a very young season. I'm all for fun. I'm all for inside jokes. I'm all for having nicknames. Listen, Carlos Delgado used to call everybody Jimmy, just in case he didn't know their name. He'd call everybody Jimmy. And if he knew you, you were Jimmy, because he didn't want to make anybody else feel bad. So no matter who walked up to him and said hi, he'd say, hey, Jimmy, how's it going? And give him a look, and he's like, no, Jimmy's good. When he calls you James, and I'm sorry, James, but if he calls you James, then he really doesn't know your name. You know what I mean? When he calls you James, that means he didn't know your name. But he called everybody Jimmy. That was his thing. That's what you're looking at, is that's a little covert thing. And now what you're seeing is these guys are just, I don't know. To me, I've been in both sides of it, working at SNY and working in the media now. And I know how the media is looking to poke the bear and get somebody to spill the beans. They're constantly, and now that becomes the story. That becomes the focus. I said this back in 2010 when I left the Mets. I said the problem with the Mets organization is that the Yankees are locked tight. With all the struggles that they just went through, all the answers that you got were cliche. They're boring. They are so boring, but it's locked tight from the network to the players, to the manager. You don't get inside. There is a level that you get to, a level of answer that you get from them, and it's a professional answer. That's how they answer their questions. That's how they don't give you an inch. A team like the Mets has so many personalities on it. Instantly, with the internet, and you got Stroman on Twitter, you got, a guy like I was always worried. What if they did sign Bauer? It would have been a circus, an absolute circus, with all the things that he would be able to talk about, because he's looking for ratings. He's looking for likes. He's looking for, people to subscribe. So imagine him waking up or going to bed last night. He would have told you all about the story of what happened, because that's what's important to him. The Mets have so many players and so many characters, and there's so much charisma on this team that they're likable guys. But I think now the story becomes not what's on the field. Right? The stuff that happens they won the game. They came back, the biggest comeback of the season. Lindor hits a home run. There was not one question asked about the game, in the post-game press conference last night. And that's disappointing, because that's what you want the focus to be on. Hey, we're playing winning baseball. We pulled together. We did this as a team. If I'm the media guy for the Mets, I'm having to sit down with these guys today and saying, listen, this stuff has to stop. This has to stop, because it's a circus already. And there's people on the internet, and there's a famous guy on the internet who paints what happens after every game. He's painting this picture for a season-long thing. He's running out of space already, because there's so many stories already, so many juicy little stories, that even something as mild as Carrasco getting pushed back or set back, but they didn't say why. They didn't even say why. They didn't say he had a setback or anything like that. They just said, we're just going to put him on the 60-day and bring him back later, which made no sense, because you think one of the better pitchers that you have to be ready and be available. So the media circus is strong around the New York Mets, and that's one of the things that I think they've got to put a tent over very quickly.
I will say that story, Nelson, you just told about Carlos Delgado has probably officially cemented him as my favorite player on those mid-2000 teams. That is fantastic. I'll be using that in the future for sure. Nelson Figueroa, co-host of the Amazing But True podcast for the New York Post. Great to talk all things Mets with you. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure, guys. You got it. Take care.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
One-on-one, hour number 2. You're on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. Jimmy, Dylan, Andrew with you for the next hour and 58 minutes here on all 3 platforms. And guys, before we had the drama and the odd stuff that happened at the Mets game last night, we thought that we were going to lead off this show talking about the New York Yankees, because on the low, it has been a strange week for them as well. They played the Houston Astros, a very momentous occasion for them, given what the Astros did not once but possibly twice to them in the ALCS, not just winning, but potentially in nefarious fashion in 2019, definitely in nefarious fashion in 2017. And they welcomed them back to the stadium. Fans had trash cans. And there was a lot of booing, a lot of chants directed at Jose Altuve. They, for example, disregarded his birthday in rather funny terms. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. And Dylan, I'll go to you first. Yankees take 2 out of 3 from the Astros, lose to the Nationals on Friday night. But it's been a fascinating year for them. They are mired at 500. They're only 3.5 games back. But I think an odd start for the Yankees this year, in a year in which they have incredibly high expectations.
Yeah, I think like everybody, I marked that Astros series on the schedule with like maybe 3 or 4 different pens before the season started, just because it was going to be notable. This was going to be their return to the stadium after you're going to have to face what you did. But as the season got started for the Yankees, and they just seem to be, like Andrew mentioned earlier in the show, they just seem lifeless. It's the perfect word to describe it. This appeared to me to be, oh, this will probably be the series where you're going to get riled up again. You're going to remember why you want that World Series. You got something to prove. In fact, you got two things to prove at this point. So you think this Astros series is what's going to push them back forward? And it was a momentous series, like you mentioned, Jimmy, and it was powerful to watch. And I think the Yankees really showed they're as good of a team as anybody in that series. They dominated, and then they come out Friday night against the Nationals and completely blow it, and not just blow it. It ended up being a blowout. So it was really strange to watch. And Andrew, I don't know about you, but I can't decide how I feel about this team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been the last time I was on one-on-one, I had asked this question: will the real New York Yankees please stand up? Because we see them beat up on Detroit, and Detroit, I mean, let's just call it what it is. That's a glorified minor league team. Miguel Cabrera looks like he's 137 years old, and it's just, I mean, you're supposed to take care of business there. But then that energy in the first two games against the Astros, Jimmy, I thought that would be the springboard. When they won those two games, it's like, all right, this Yankees team, this is what they needed. That energy from the crowd, the hatred that they have towards the Astros, that could be the starting point for them going on a run. And then that final game, Chad Green gives up a big home run. They end up losing. And then Friday night, Loaizaga gives up 4 in the 8th, I believe. And that's that. Sessa gives up 2 more, and the Nationals are able to blow the doors open. The offense was not supposed to be the problem, guys. It wasn't supposed to be the hitting. They were supposed to be able to put up runs. I think the questions were about the starting rotation after Garrett Cole and the question marks, Kluber, Tyone, how would they fare not having played in the last year or two? And they've started to come into form. You're seeing, especially from Tyone, I mean, his stuff looks good. He looked great in the first couple of innings. But if this offense, and Gary Sanchez had a home run, and I think early on LeMahieu ties the game too, you're thinking, like, I'm sitting there as a Yankees fan thinking to myself, all right, guys are finally starting to get it. Maybe this is what they need. But every time I think that, Jimmy, it doesn't manifest, and they go back and they revert back to a team that can't hit consistently, and a pitching staff right now that, aside from Garrett Cole, can be shaky and unpredictable. So knowing this, I mean, there's still a long ways away before we get to September and ultimately October, Jimmy. But for the Yankees, this inconsistency for a team that has championship or bust aspirations, it's not the auspicious start that everyone was hoping for.
Couple points I want to make here. First, I want to give Yankees fans a lot of credit for bringing it in that Astros series. I was texting with Emmanuel Berbari, our sports manager, who was at the first game. And he was just telling me it was electric. You have 10,000 and change there, and people were going down. It sounded like a playoff game, even with that few fans there. So I can't wait for when they can have even more fans there, because it's just going to be awesome. But you bring up the point about the offense. What have we heard about the Yankees offense for the last 3-4 years? Oh boy, if Giancarlo Stanton ever just stays healthy and stays in this lineup, it's going to be awesome. Well, he's stayed healthy. He's stayed in the lineup. He's hitting. He's got 9 home runs. He hits a ball 120 miles an hour every night. And what are they doing? This is the frustrating thing for Yankees fans. And I maintain my opinion from the last couple of weeks on this show. I ultimately believe this team will be fine. If anything, by default. I look around the American League and I'm sorry. I don't see other teams that can compete with them. I mean, we were talking about the Chicago White Sox. They have a manager who didn't know that you could use a pinch runner in extra innings for the runner on second in the 10th. So that's a problem. You've got other teams around here. I mean, do we think Boston's legit? I mean, they've currently got the best record in the American League. I mean, Oakland, Seattle's in a playoff spot right now. I mean, I don't see a lot of teams in the American League that, if the Yankees are clicking on all cylinders, can beat them. And that's probably why this year is really pennant or bust for the Yankees. It's more of a default thing. But everybody's always said with Stanton, with Judge, and Judge had some issues earlier in the year. But besides that, I mean, he's been, for the most part, in the lineup as well. You always said, wow, if these two guys could just stay healthy, stay in the lineup, they're going to be fine. Well, yeah, they have. and it's like they're finding other ways to lose, and that's the frustrating thing. And that, to a certain extent, goes back to Aaron Boone, but also it's more of a frustrating thing that I think should even out. But this team, it's tough to watch. And also, like, let's be honest, okay, the lineup construction on this team, like, Aaron Hicks is not a 3-hitter. Like, I'm sorry, I mean, Aaron Boone went and he gave him the day off today. But it's, you've got Gary Sanchez hitting 182. I mean, DJ LeMahieu off to a slow start for him at 283. But, Clint Frazier at 156. So Odor came in, he's at 164. Hicks is 196. I mean, hitting's down across the league, so I get that. But it's frustrating. It's tough for all you spent on the offense. And Luke Voigt's coming back too. Like, that's a big deal. That'll really help the Yankees when he does. On a number of fronts, offensively and defensively, which has also been an issue for them. But yeah, it's for a team I don't root for, I shouldn't be this frustrated.
Yeah,
Dylan, you might want to turn your mic on before you say that.
Yeah, this is 101 sports broadcasting, my friend.
Oopsie daisy! Wow, I can't believe I just did that. That was really embarrassing. But anyways, speaking of embarrassing, this Yankee team. Oh
boy!
I actually also want to give the Yankee fans credit, not only for how they welcomed the Astros into the Bronx, what a welcome mat they showed them, but also to their credit, I think we tend to think of Yankee fans as incredibly impatient and if you don't win, it's all hell's gonna break loose. I think they've been rather patient with this team, all things considered, to this point in the year, and I find that rather admirable because it's actually incredibly frustrating how little they're producing specifically offensively. And, like you've talked about, Jimmy, Stanton's been healthy. Judge has been in the lineup almost every game of this season. So you wonder, what's the problem here then? And the answer is, we have no idea what the problem is, because they're there and they're hitting the ball hard, but the balls are not leaving the ballpark. They're not getting a lot of extra base hits either. A lot of their hits are singles. It's not the Yankee team we expected to see. And what the part that makes it really difficult is you look at a guy like Gary Sanchez, and people are very critical of Gary Sanchez, myself included. And then when you least expect it, he will hit a home run, and then you think, oh well, that turns things around, and it never does. So that's incredibly frustrating. And to your point earlier also, Jimmy, I also think they're going to be just fine. I don't know when they're going to figure it out. I hope for their sake it's in the next week or so, because it's no longer early in the season. They're running out of time to say, well, it's early. But yeah, you look in their division, Boston is the best team other than them, and I just don't think what they have going for them right now is sustainable. The Central has its issues. You look at the Angels, and it's like, you got Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, you're not going to make the playoffs. Are you out of your mind? But that's a whole other topic. But I agree. I think the Yankees are going to be just fine. But Andrew, I think whoever they face in this hypothetical World Series might whoop them if they don't shape up.
Yeah, Jimmy threw some trivia about the Mets. I mean, I have trivia about the Yankees. There's only one Yankee player batting over 300 right now. Who is that Yankee?
Oh, I cheated on this one, so I'll recuse myself.
Dylan?
Oh, don't leave it just to me. So it's probably a surprise. So let me think here. I'm stumped. Who is it?
It is actually Giancarlo Stanton. He's batting 301. Think about that, Dylan. When your best hitter is Giancarlo Stanton at 301, and Jimmy mentioned LeMahieu at 283, which for him is pedestrian. I mean, that's what we're looking at offensively. Gio Urshela was hitting well. He was at the moment over just about similar to DJ LeMahieu, and then he goes out with an injury. So for the Yankees team, that's another thing too. Injuries were something that plagued them throughout previous seasons. And so far this season, they've been relatively clean, but you got to wonder in the back of your head, if you're a Yankee fan, for Aaron Judge, he's not hitting well and he's healthy right now. Well, what if sooner or later something aggravates him and he's compromised even more, Jimmy? I'd have to think even though injuries are something that are out of your control, with the history that this team has shown over the last 3 or 4 years, as a Yankees fan, you have to be thinking to yourself, this team is healthy and they're not producing. What's going to happen when the injury bug inevitably rears its ugly head?
Yeah, and it's interesting too to throw out some other numbers. So here's some more data for you. According to expected batting average, that's a StatCast metric based on exit velocity and how hard you hit the ball, how high you hit the ball, etc. The Yankees are actually 6th, believe it or not.
Oh.
So it goes to show you that their offense should probably be a bit better right now, and maybe they haven't gotten the breaks. Still, though, it is jarring to look up at some of the statistics at this point in the season and see that they've scored fewer runs than the Mariners and the Marlins. Yeah, that was not supposed to happen, in case you haven't been paying attention. That being said, I still feel all right about this team. I don't know how you guys feel. I look at the baseball season, I try not to draw any conclusions before Memorial Day, because you have so many games early in the year, and the weather's kind of what it is, and it's hard to figure out what a team is really until about half of the season is done. Like, you don't have, like, we have to be honest with ourselves. We don't have a great picture of what the Yankees are right now. Are there things to be concerned about? Sure, there's things to be concerned about. Am I concerned about, for example, Aaron Boone's stewardship of this team? Yes, I am. But I also think, this team doesn't really have its full complement. Like, you're forced to play Tyler Wade at second base. Nothing against Tyler Wade, but he is not an everyday baseball player under any circumstances. So you have guys who are sort of out of position. You've got Severino coming off Tommy John surgery. You have a bullpen that has been terrific, really, with the exception of the last couple of games. The last game against the Astros and then last night against Washington. But I think there's just enough to feel good about with the Yankees. Not a lot more, but there's just enough to feel good about for them that I sit there and go, they'll be fine at the end of the season. I still think they're going to win the AL East, even if it's more competitive. I still like them as the favorite in the American League. But as I don't remember if it was Dylan or Andrew said, so forgive me, but whoever they play in the World Series, if they get there, I don't know if I feel great about that.
Yeah, so it was actually me who said that.
Okay,
well. But when you think about it, the team they're likely going to play, if the Braves or Padres don't up it just a little bit, or maybe even the Mets, is probably going to be the Dodgers. And I look at the Dodger team of last year, and I see some comparisons to what the Yankees are now for a couple of reasons. You look at the Dodger team last year, a team that had twice lost in the World Series to teams that we thought were just better than them. And maybe in some ways they were in the reality of things, but we know what happened with the 2017 Astros, the 2018 Red Sox. And so to me in 2020, I thought the pressure was really on for the Dodgers. The pressure was on of, okay, now we all know those should have been your World Series, so to speak. Now prove it to us. Now prove to us that you've been given this full opportunity. Prove to us you were supposed to win those 2 World Series anyway. And to me, that's kind of how I see this Yankee team right now, because the Astros are not going to be a problem anymore as they were for a while. Injuries are not going to be as much of an excuse anymore because Luke Voigt's coming back. Giancarlo Stanton's been healthy. Judge has been healthy, like we keep talking about. Aaron Boone is now an experienced major league manager. He is no longer a rookie manager, none of that. So I think part of the reason the Yankees have struggled, at least to this point, is they realize that, like, not only is this a championship or bust year like any other Yankee season, quite frankly, in this Steinbrennian era we've hit over the last 4 decades, or 5, excuse me. But I think they understand that, like, the momentum that they're going to need here is enormous because the pressure is on.
And if I could add a couple of things, Aaron Judge, at some point, we're talking about putting superstar players on the clock. Francisco Lindor has been on the clock. Mets fans have been restless. He has that huge home run on Friday night and kind of, aside with the raccoon and the rat, that kind of strays away from the kind of angst that people have had to a slow start. But Aaron Judge, since May 1st, he had 3 hits. After that, 1 hit in his last 16 plus at bats. I mean, in the month of May, he struck out 11 times in the first 5 games. Jimmy, at some point, with Stanton mashing the way he is, Aaron Judge is going the complete opposite way, and he is just on a fall right now. The Yankees were hoping that, Aaron Judge could at least be that stabilizer, him alongside LeMahieu and Gleyber Torres, guys that that you can kind of guarantee that they're going to hit for you throughout an entire season. That's not been the case for Aaron Judge. And this Yankees team, they're still second in the majors in home runs, but there's nobody on base when they're knocking them. There are a lot of solo shots for them. So as much production as they may be getting power-wise, the guys who are supposed to be hitting for contact, Jimmy, they're not doing so. And for someone like Aaron Judge, he's leaving guys on base when he does have the opportunity. So, I mean, at some point, I imagine Cashman and the Yankees will address, the pitching situation. Maybe they go out there and get themselves another arm to add with Garrett Cole and to shore up that rotation. But if this offense can't at least turn it around and become more balanced, this is a team that's going to stick right there and maybe be sub 500 after Memorial Day, Jimmy. And if they're sub 500 after Memorial Day going into the month of June, I mean, New York fans at some point, 2009 seems like decades ago, Dylan. So Yankees fans are restless. They want to know, where is this championship that we thought they knocked on the door in 2017. They knocked on the door in 2018. And now here in 2021, the Yankees aren't even in front of that door right now. They're like 10, 20 feet away and just waiting online to see if they can knock on the door again. So, Jimmy, there's a lot that's going to be there's a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered in the next month or two. And Dylan, I know you have something to say, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions left. And for the Yankees, these next 3 to 4 weeks are going to be crucial to see who they are and where they ultimately are going to end up in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, just to kind of summarize here, specifically what you were saying, Yankee fans are not going to let their team forget that they went an entire decade without a pennant, let alone a World Series championship. That's not acceptable in the Bronx. It just is not. And fans are not going to let their team forget that ever.
Funny thing about Aaron Judge is he has been hitting the ball very, very hard, ... when he puts it in play. And that's the biggest issue with him, right? I mean, it's always been, to an extent, the strikeouts, but I mean, he's striking out 30% of the time. Like, come on, I mean, you can't do that. Like, even in a league where the strikeouts have been consistently going up, he has won for his last 16, just like me in the FUV softball game each year. But I could relate to that for sure. We got headlines coming up next, a lot to get into, specifically with the New York Rangers. More action in a week than they've had all year. We'll get into all of that next. One-on-one, taking you up until 2 a.m. We'll be right back.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Whether you're taking that midnight train down to Georgia or back up to the Boogie Down Bronx, New York's longest running sports call-in show continues. This is One-on-One. I am Andrew Posadas, and now here with your first set of headlines alongside Jimmy Sullivan and Dylan Balsamo. And fellas, let's talk that hockey, because we don't get to talk enough hockey, and unfortunately, not the box score exactly the ideal news and the ideal headline that you want out of the NHL, but something we need to talk about in itself. And let's start there with Washington Capitals right winger Tom Wilson. Now, as we all remember, Monday night, Tom Wilson and the Capitals faced the New York Rangers. And in that game, Tom Wilson with a bunch of cheap shots, first on Pavel Buchnevich, and then afterwards on Artemi Panarin, which set him out for the rest of the season as a season-ending injury. A couple of days later on Wednesday night, the Rangers retaliated. Once the puck dropped in the first 5 to 10 seconds, there were fights all over the place. I believe it went over an hour's worth of fights between both teams. Tom Wilson himself was in a fight. And on Friday, he spoke in his first interview since that scrum earlier in the week that left Panarin injured and led him to a $5,000 fine. But the NHL did not suspend Tom Wilson. And as we know, he's had 5 previous suspensions in his career. And in that interview, Tom Wilson said that he reached out to Panarin to make sure that he's good and that he was good after sustaining an upper body injury. And now saying that, quote, "I'm glad Panarin is doing well. He's better. I reached out to him, and that's really what matters right now," end quote. And Tom Wilson also said that he's ready to move on. So, Jimmy, I'll start with you when it comes to this situation between Wilson and the New York Rangers. Should Panarin, Buchnevich, and the Rangers forgive Wilson for those cheap shots earlier in the week?
No. And I think it's ridiculous when the Rangers come out with a team statement about this, saying that George Parros, who's the head of NHL player safety, is unfit to continue in his role. And they get fined 50 times what Tom Wilson got for ragdolling Artemi Panarin. And there was the other player with Buchnevich, which was an incredibly cheap shot. I mean, this is what Tom Wilson did to Artemi Panarin. We need to underscore the seriousness of this here. He could have killed him in that fight, right? Like, Artemi Panarin got hurt. He's out for the rest of the season, which is only a couple more games at this point. He could have killed him. That's one of the best players in the NHL. And I saw people were, defending Tom Wilson, like Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. Defending Tom Wilson at this point to me is a joke, but there's a guy I follow on Twitter who's really good, who I actually used to work with at FitzGSN, and he tweeted out, it was a really great point. He said, it's the NHL needs to be in the business of cultivating its stars, like what the NBA does such a great job of, the NFL, MLB maybe to a lesser extent. And you had a guy in Sidney Crosby who had his career forever altered by concussions. Thankfully, he's been able to play through a lot of that, and he's been on the ice. But you have a fleet of young stars in the NHL: Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, Artemi Panarin, and just McKinnon in Colorado. And you need to be in the business of keeping them on the ice. Like, let's just be frank about that. Those guys being in the game and having the NHL be able to promote them and say, you can watch this on whatever network. I know the NHL just got a new rights deal, and we'll maybe get into that later. But you can't have this. You can't have a guy going out there and like, let's be real about it. He put several Rangers players in danger on Monday night. And I'm a guy who, I go to a hockey game, I love the physicality and the checking and all the stuff that comes with that. But at some point, you got to stop. And Tom Wilson crossed the line long ago. He ought to be out of the league as far as I'm concerned. But, man, this is ridiculous. I couldn't believe he did it again. And probably his worst infraction yet in the NHL. Just, wipes a blind eye, gives him a slap on the wrist, and off he goes. Ridiculous.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here, especially if you're a Ranger fan. There's just so much. First of all, that first period, just to get the numbers right, it was 100 minutes total of penalties in the first in the opening period. And me being a novice, I guess, I figured it was like, is that the most ever in a period? And the answer is no. The first period of a 1981 game between the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota North Stars had 341 total penalty minutes in the first period. Took an hour and a half to play. I just thought
You were there, right?
Yes, I was there, clearly. But to my knowledge of what I was able to find, that was the most. But that's beside the point. What I find so weird about this, and there's a whole bunch of different things, and Jimmy just elaborated on the gravity of this issue. The fact that Tom Wilson feels he has the right to say, "I'm ready to move on."
Yeah.
Well, are you out of your mind? What if Andrew? What if I punched you in the face and then you fell to the ground and I was like, "Look, get over it. Why can't we just get along? Why can't we be friends?" That is exactly what Tom Wilson has done here. And the NHL went, that works for me. Let's penalize the other people. But it's also a matter of, I think, I agree with you, Jimmy. Also, I'm all about the physicality of hockey. It's an exciting sport, just by its very nature. But I think there's a lot of people who will watch players be in serious physical danger on the ice because of certain players like Tom Wilson, for one reason or another, and fans and analysts and all different types of people in the hockey universe will chalk it up to, well, that's hockey. You take that risk when you get out there on the ice. I was like, that just sounds like an excuse for really aggressive people to get out there on the ice and take out their anger and be overtly physical and put human beings in danger. I think with a game like hockey, where we tend to think of it of, if you retire with all your teeth, you're not doing it right. I think when we think of a game like that, we tend to forget these are human beings out on the ice, and to have these players lose their humanity so that someone like Tom Wilson can just do whatever he wants, and the NHL just allows it to happen because they think it's going to bring in ratings, a guy like him being exciting, to put that in air quotes. It's incredibly concerning. It's a human rights issue, quite frankly, and it's an issue that hockey needs to address. And I'm sure you agree with us on this, Andrew.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, Dylan, that hypothetical situation that you brought up, that sounded a lot like I was Jeff McNeil and you were Francisco Lindor last night. So, I will say that first. No, secondly, I think this is a classic case of only one bully on the block. Hockey has changed where not every team has an enforcer. I mean, the Rangers don't have one there. I mean, when Panarin, your finesse guy, your goal scorer, one of your better offensive players, has to try and take on that role Monday night, that's not what you want if you're the Rangers, and it costs Panarin the rest of the season. So at this point, when you look at the landscape of hockey right now and in the NHL, Tom Wilson's really the last of a dying breed in terms of, and I wouldn't even call him an enforcer, really, Jimmy. He's a goon. I mean, an enforcer does what he has to do to help neutralize or stabilize games that are getting out of control. A goon is just a guy who's out there bush leaguing it and doing whatever he wants and feeling like he's not going to get, nothing substantial is going to happen to him. And in this case, it didn't. A $5,000 fine, let me tell you, that's nothing. That's chicken feed. That's something that Tom Wilson can wipe his nose with allergy season right here in full effect. So not getting suspended. Now, if you're the NHL, you can't be shocked at what happened Wednesday night with the amount of fighting and the way the first period started. If you're not going to take it in your own hands to stop this and suspend and penalize guys like Tom Wilson for doing these type of actions, then you can't be surprised when these other teams take matters into their own hands and police themselves. And that's what I've always loved about hockey. They police themselves. If guys have something that, if there's a disagreement, discord, they will go to each other before the period starts and say, hey, I want to fight you. Are you ready? All right, I will see you on the ice. And that's something that I think is respectable. I know a lot of people don't like it. They think it's barbaric, but I think the National Hockey League has done about as good a job policing themselves and allowing fighting into the sport that you can without it being full-blown MMA or boxing. So I just think ultimately for Tom Wilson, he's lucky that he's not playing back in the 70s or the 60s or the 80s, because I'm sure there would be teams night in and night out that would be ready and willing to light him up, Jimmy, and make sure he understands that these types of actions, these types of plays are not going to be tolerated in the NHL.
I feel like, though, even the worst enforcers, the nastiest guys, had some sort of ethics to them. Right. Like I am reminded, and Andrew, I'll bring this up because I know you've seen The Wire, but what Omar would always say, like 1,000 times, a man's got to have a code.
Yep.
And that's what this is. I want to read you guys the greatest team statement ever, if I may. This got a couple people fired with the Rangers, John Davidson, Jeff Gordon, their front office, basically. James Dolan woke up on, I guess it was Wednesday morning and remembered that he ran the Rangers. But this is the greatest statement I have ever seen. The New York Rangers are extremely disappointed the Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these types of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and their Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing again this season. We view this as a dereliction of duty by NHL head of player safety George Parros and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. Guys, if I ever get fired from my job, I want to do it on a statement like that. That was terrific. Good on the Rangers. And that is how I think everybody feels about this current situation, at least here on this call. So good on the New York Rangers for that statement, even though a couple people had to fall on the sword for it.
Yeah, you know what, and from what I gathered, it seemed like that was mostly Dolan it was mostly Dolan's statement, and it was actually Gordon and Davidson who were trying to back away from it, and that's what led them to having to leave the organization. And that's a whole other conversation of whether that's a fireable offense to try and back out of a statement. But you know, here's the thing: we talk about fighting in hockey and with his place for it. My grandfather was a boxer. And he was not a particularly aggressive person. He was kind of a small guy, and that was from my dad's tellings of him, his way of being a tough guy, I guess. But you know, not only was there a code of ethics, but it's a craft. You know, the art of fighting, or the art of boxing, or whatever you want to say. There's a craft to it, and that's basically what hockey for a long period of time had brought to the fighting element of its game. And there's no problem with that. It's exciting. It's fun. We like seeing it. It reminds us of our ancient Roman roots, I guess one might say. But, you know, I think there needs to be a much stricter policy on where to allow, you know, fighting and physicality and aggressiveness and its difference between that and violence, because putting a player in danger is inexcusable, especially when this guy has a history, Tom Wilson, of doing so. So, you know, a lot of people thought that was a really, really long stretch to call for George Parros's job to be taken from him, but I don't think it was that far of a stretch, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this. Tom Wilson said one thing that was right in his interview on Friday when he spoke about the whole situation. He said, nothing I say right now is going to change anybody's opinion. Absolutely correct. And it's warranted. Nobody should change their opinion on you from what you're saying. Even if you show remorse, you can apologize 1,000,000 times. The proof is in the pudding. And as Dylan mentioned, his reputation precedes himself. And this is what players around the league know him for, and that's what they'll continue to know him for as long as he laces up his skates and trots out there and acting the way he is. And now the Capitals and Wilson, they'll look to move forward as they go to the playoffs and trying to capture another Stanley Cup, while the New York Rangers are unfortunately eliminated and will look to regroup and recollect themselves for next season. Guys, I want to get in one more headline as we move over from the ice to the diamond. And huge news out of the West Coast in Los Angeles on Thursday morning. Albert Pujols designated for assignment from the Los Angeles Angels, and his release comes just 2 months into the last season of a 10-year, $240 million contract. Now, Albert Pujols certainly hasn't lived up to that contract. When you think about what he did with the Cardinals in 11 season, batting .328. I mean, he won 3 MVPs in 2005, 2008, 2009. And in the 10 years with the Angels, batting .256, his best MVP finish was 17th. Certainly hasn't given the Angels the full expectations of that decade. And as we know with this franchise, even with Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, bringing in Albert Pujols and some of their other notable signings, nothing has really manifested from it. But let's focus on Albert Pujols and really where he goes from here. I mean, it's not a guarantee he'll be claimed by another team. This may very well be his last stop in the majors. So Dylan, I'll go to you first. If this really is it for Albert Pujols, how will you remember the legacy of the man that they called the Machine?
Well, there's a couple things here. First of all, one of my roommates is from St. Louis, big Cardinals fan. I was the one who broke the news to him of this, and for him it was quite joyful news because he was like, his mentality was, oh my goodness, he's going to retire a Cardinal. This is fantastic. And perhaps maybe that will happen, and that would be wonderful for his sake, for the city of St. Louis. I hope that happens for them. But I try not to blame players who do not live up to ginormous contracts for not living up to ginormous contracts, because those contracts are too big. I don't think I have ever seen a 10-year contract actually work out. It just never ever happens. And I say that fully knowing that Francisco Lindor just signed a 10-year extension with the Mets, and we'll see how that works out. But, to me, Pujols is just a great example of a guy who in specifically the 2012, 2013 era of baseball and excuse me, one of my roommates is yelling right now. That era of free agent signees all signed 8-10-year contracts, and they were all too big of contracts. That's just how it came to be. So I don't blame Pujols for that. I'll remember the great moments in St. Louis and remember the great moments in Anaheim as well. I'll remember his place on the all-time home run list, and his place in baseball history is cemented, no matter whether his career is done now or done a year from now.
So Albert Pujols is no longer an Angel. You know who is still an Angel?
Mike Trout.
Mickey Callaway.
I wasn't even thinking about that. Oh.
Yeah, well, not that he should be, but I'll tell a personal story here. So I was 12 years old, and I went to a Mets game. It was 2011, and I love going to batting practice. I just think it's great. And so we got in. We were one of the first people in, and I went down. We were standing along, the left field line. And that was back when Citi Field still had the big wall in left field. So I just thought, nobody can hit home runs in this place, except for a select couple of people, especially out in that area of the ballpark. It's just impossible to do. And sure enough, Pujols was taking batting practice. That's part of why I wanted to get out there. I wanted to watch Pujols. And he took a ball, and I'd never seen this before, or since, I think. I'm pretty sure this hasn't happened since, at least not in a game. But Pujols took one. This was pre-juiced ball, and he hit one all the way to the upper deck in left. And I thought, what did I just watch? That is impossible. How could somebody do that? So that was a very fond memory for me, seeing someone hit a baseball that far. Because that was probably close to 500 feet. Never seen anything like that, I don't think, since, maybe once, but it was incredible stuff. And you think about his career, and he goes to the Angels when they were in the midst of just a heater with bad contracts. Pujols, C.J. Wilson, Josh Hamilton, all in that time frame. But you think about how his career has ended, and how Miguel Cabrera's career seems to be ending in Detroit, unfortunately. And it makes me very thankful that somebody like David Ortiz, for example, got a storybook ending at the end of his career. Somebody like Derek Jeter got a storybook ending, even though he wasn't as productive in the final year of his career. that those guys were able to stay healthy, get to the end. And that's really for all sports, right? I mean, Kobe Bryant's last game, everybody remembers really well. So that makes me very thankful that we got to see those guys go out fairly on their own terms and healthy and in somewhat of a storybook fashion, because a lot of the time, unfortunately, it ends like this. You get DFA'd and you're wondering when that next shot is going to come, and it doesn't come. So I think it makes me thankful for all the other guys who didn't have to go through this, but unfortunately it's kind of common in baseball. And I feel for Albert Pujols, but the reason why it happened and the process, it's all made sense, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll try and keep my thoughts succinct because I know we're a little pressed on time. But when I think about Albert Pujols and when he won that second World Series, I think it was 2011 with the Cardinals, I really thought, all right, he's going to stay here. But I couldn't blame him when he took that extra money and that extra, 2 years that the Angels were willing to offer him. I mean, the Angels basically paid him for what he did and not really for what they thought he was going to do. I mean, I'm sure some of them thought, wait, over the decade, he'll still be productive. But I think in their heart of hearts, they believed, hey, this contract is really more so about what Pujols has done in those first 10 years than what we think he's going to pan out in the next subsequent decade. And Jimmy, when you think about that 10-year run that Pujols had, you put that up with anybody's in history, and it's as good, if not better than anyone's. And it's his first 10 years. We're not talking about your best 10-year period where you were already 3 or 4 years in. We're talking about Pujols' first 10 years. 408 home runs, 1,230 RBIs. He batted .331. And when you think about his career in totality, 5th in career home runs, 667, 2nd in RBIs with over 2,100, and 14th in hits. He has over 3,200 hits. Guys, I think of Albert Pujols, and I liken him in the category with the Ken Griffey Jr., where I knew throughout his entire career this guy was clean. Even in the steroid era, and with guys still taking him at that time, Albert Pujols, never one rumor or never any story where that was credible that people thought, well, this guy has to be, juicing or something along those lines. Albert Pujols is as good a player that you will have ever seen. And I think it's a shame that he wasn't able to finish it in St. Louis. But to Dylan's point, I think maybe now if St. Louis wants, they could sign him and he could retire there. But there's some other spots. They're talking about maybe the White Sox, Tony La Russa, his former manager, and maybe some other teams that are going through injuries in the next month or two. If they need a guy that they can kind of, plug in as the DH or maybe a first baseman every now and then, I think Pujols may find another shot, but it's going to have to take maybe some injuries and some moving parts in order to get Pujols back and finishing out his career. But even so, no matter how it ends, I mean, when you think about Albert Pujols, he's a surefire, no doubter Hall of Famer. And it's somebody that I think the three of us are going to be happy that at least we got to see him, towards the end of his prime. And I will just say this, that homer that he had over Brad Lidge, at least once every fall, you will get it on Twitter. Somebody will bring up the anniversary. I don't think I've ever seen a ball crushed like that in my life. If you guys have anyone of your own, but for me, when I see the video of that over off Brad Lidge, Jimmy, it's perhaps the greatest home run I've ever seen hit in my life.
I've also never seen a stadium go that quiet that quickly. It was incredible. I will say I think he's going to the White Sox because I think Jerry Reinsdorf was dropped out of the sky to sign a 41-year-old Albert Pujols and put him at first and expect him to do anything good. And Tony La Russa's there too. So we'll see where he winds up going, but he's going to the White Sox. Let's be real here. All right, approaching 1 a.m. here in the East. Talking some basketball next. Knicks, Nets. Falling on hard times a little bit, believe it or not, recently. But we'll get into all of that next. Jimmy, Dylan, Andrew with you for the next hour plus here on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll be right back.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Just a few minutes until 1 a.m. here on 90.7 FM. Facebook and YouTube, it's one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Got to talk some basketball here to close out the midnight hour. Talking Knicks, talking Nets. Say Knicks for clicks, so we'll start with the Knicks. They've lost the last couple of games, one to Denver, one to Phoenix. They're still in the fourth spot in the East, just barely though. Handful of games left for them. They're a half game up on fifth place. And Dylan, a fantastic season for the Knicks, but with 5 games to go, still a decent amount for them to lose in the playoff picture. They are at least into the play-in tournament, no matter what happens the rest of the way. But not the best time to drop a couple of games here, particularly last night in blowout fashion in Phoenix.
It would certainly not be the best time, arguably the worst time. That's just my opinion, though. But here's the thing: is we all know this was kind of a very pleasant surprise. This run the New York Knicks have had this year, and it's so fun to watch, and it's so exciting to watch both New York teams near the top of the Eastern Conference. But there is something to be said about experience down the stretch of the regular season. It is essential to any team that's going to win. Teams do not win in their first year of trying to get things together. This is a very 2015 Mets New York Knicks team. It's just things have fallen into place in a certain way. The talent's been there. It's just glued together in just the right way this year. And things have worked for them. So, are they going to struggle against teams that have a little more experience than them down the line of this regular season, and specifically as they get into at least the play-in tournament, perhaps even the first round of the playoffs? Yeah, it's going to be hard. But, if you're the Knicks, perhaps the best way to be looking at this is not as much about going for the trophy this season and gunning for the trophy this season as much as it is you are here so that you're ready come time when you're here next season, because they're going to be there next season.
Yeah, that's certainly the hope. And I think some of the veteran guys will help. Rose, Taj Gibson, Nerlens Noel, like those guys will be helpful to this Knicks team as they go along here. 5 games left. They've got the Clippers, Lakers, Spurs, Hornets, Celtics. That's not an easy schedule going down the stretch of the season by any stretch of the imagination. But it's doable, and they've already clinched being above 500. So the Knicks are going to try to finish the season strong here. All those teams, as far as I'm concerned, have something to play for. Spurs are in the last spot in the West playoffs. The Pelicans, it looks like, somehow are going to miss again, which is crazy. Doesn't it seem like the NBA has skewered everything just to get Zion to the playoffs, and yet it still doesn't happen?
Well, he's injured.
Yes. No. He is, and I'm not trying to.
No, but it's just no matter what it is they do. I found that really interesting. I thought it was a great idea by the NBA to adjust the playoffs while they were in Florida to make sure Zion was there. I was all for that idea. I love that. It's something we talked about in the last segment of the show was leagues building themselves around making sure their stars get primetime spots. Yeah, and the NBA does that better than anybody in the entire world. They're so good at that. But as much as they try to put the spotlight on Zion, it's just not working. Andrew, you seem like you have some thoughts on this.
The Pelicans, with that amount of talent, and for Stan Van Gundy to find himself at, 30 and 37, and 2.5 games out from the Spurs. Well, I love the Spurs, but they're not the Spurs of old. They're not my Spurs or my daddy's Spurs. No, these are a newfound Spurs that are finding their way. For the Pelicans to be 30-37 with a guy like Stan Van Gundy at the helm, Jimmy, it's disgraceful. There's too much talent. Stan Van Gundy, he's been around the block. He understands what it takes to get to an NBA Finals. How is this team that well, like Stephen A. Smith once said, I just don't understand it, Jimmy. I really don't. That team is too talented. But I will say this on the New York Knicks front. I know everyone's kind of recalibrated and kind of raised their expectations for this team with the amount of success that they've had. But let's all have some perspective and put context. The Denver Nuggets are a really, really good team that even without Jamal Murray, with Nikola Jokic and Michael Porter Jr., that is enough star power to get them into the semifinals and even potentially to the Western Conference Finals. And the Phoenix Suns, has there been a better story with Monty Williams, with Chris Paul's been able to do cementing his MVP case? He's going to finish top 3. So I think for the Knicks, they're still growing pains. And when you see that end of the third quarter where that turnover by RJ Barrett inbounding it, Payne steals it, and instead of being tied 88-88, they're down by 2, and that's just kind of the start of the snowball effect heading into the fourth. That's things that a young team is going to have to learn, Dylan. So it's better that they learn them now than come postseason time in that 4-5 matchup against the Hawks, a team they should be in the first round. Better them experience it now than in the postseason and maybe losing in heartbreaking fashion in the first round potentially.
Absolutely, and perhaps I'm being too finite about what the potential is for the Knicks this year. Perhaps they're going to go farther than I expect for them to, because I've kind of been chalking it up to the idea of this is really just experience for them for next season. But they can easily compete in this Eastern Conference, get Eastern Conference semis. It's possible for them this year, which is really something. And Jimmy, maybe this isn't the year for them, but then again, maybe it is.
But also, like, RJ Barrett's 20 years old.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm saying that every week, but it's true. Like, this guy is in his second year in the NBA, and people have just these absurd expectations for him. And I guess it was because of his draft class, which I get that. But the Knicks have their guy. I mean, Julius Randle's an MVP candidate, and RJ on the low could be a most improved guy as well. He's not going to get it, but that would be an interesting conversation to have. Just speed round real quick here. Nets are down to the 3rd seed in the East. It doesn't feel like they can ever get all 3 of these guys on the floor at the same time. I'll just go around the room here. I mean, are we really concerned about the Nets going into the playoffs? I don't think I am, but I want to solicit your quick thoughts on this as we close out the midnight hour. Andrew, I'll go to you first. Sorry, I should have indicated that.
See,
I keep forgetting there's 2 of you.
Folks, just to kind of lift the curtain up a bit and just give you a...
Oh, and it looks like we lost Andrew. So, Dylan, I'll go to you instead.
All right, let's do it. Okay, I'm not incredibly worried about the Nets for an assortment of reasons. Here's the thing is I think there's going to be a point in the playoffs where the 3 of them are going to get on the court at the same time. And at that point, it's just going to be all gung-ho from there, all full speed ahead. But here's the thing. You look at the rest of their schedule. I mean, a 4-game skid, not fun at this point in the year. Arguably a bad time, like I mentioned earlier. But here's the thing. You look at the rest of their schedule for the year. They got the Nuggets tonight. It's going to be a close game. Both teams really good. I would say pretty evenly matched. Then after that, you got the Bulls. You're going to win that game. You got San Antonio. You're going to win that game. You got the Bulls again. You're going to win that game. You got Cleveland. You're going to win that game. They're going to close out this regular season just fine. They're going to go into the playoffs with that momentum. They're going to be just fine. I'm not worried about the Nets.
Yeah, neither am I. And Andrew, you full disclosure, you froze on us a bit. Are you?
Yeah, I was going to say my internet connection was unstable. I thought my Surface was going to blow up just now. It did not. I'm still here. But just very quickly on the Brooklyn Nets, they have lost 4 straight. But Jimmy, I put them in the same boat with the Los Angeles Lakers in that they're just trying to get healthy. If they can just get into the playoffs healthy or, 85, 90%, they can get as close to healthy as possible. They don't care if they're not going to get home court advantage in the first semifinals, Eastern, Western Conference Finals. I don't think if you're the Brooklyn Nets or the Los Angeles Lakers, you don't care about that. So as long as you can get in and guys are as healthy as they can be, I mean, the Brooklyn Nets are still the prohibitive favorite. I mean, you could take Milwaukee. Jimmy has been on that Milwaukee bandwagon for, I think, the last 12 years, as long as I've known Jimmy, and I've known Jimmy, since 2008, 2009, of course. But no, I think Milwaukee and Philadelphia, while they are contenders, if Brooklyn is whole or close to whole, that's a team that can still run through the East, even if they don't have the big three at 100%.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. They also have the luxury of not being in the Lakers spot where they're not trying to fight their way out of the play-in tournament, basically. Yeah. And I think that's a big plus. So Knicks and Nets both going to be in the playoffs. Where exactly? We'll see. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Mike Moriarty, Off the Air, the podcast, a preview of that full episode. You'll catch part of that interview next with myself and Dylan. Got another hour here on One-on-One. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Welcome to our latest edition of Off the Air, the podcast, diving into the legacy of WFUV Sports with some of its most prominent alumni. I'm Jimmy Sullivan, joined by Dylan Balsamo, and we are pleased to welcome to the show Mike Moriarty. He is a game reporter currently for AP Radio, CBS Sports Radio, and Fox Sports Radio, covering some of the local teams, and a graduate of Fordham, class of 2005. Mike, good to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. It's be fun to talk about this.
So, Mike, I want to start with where we are now with the pandemic and what we're dealing with now. How different has it been for you to cover games? Obviously, no locker room access. What has that experience been like for you over the past year and change?
Totally different, obviously, in terms of the access that we're getting, the relationships that you're building on a daily basis, whether it's post-game, pre-game, going through, basically doing this, being on Zoom with a player. Teams are kind of choosing, unless you really, are stringent on what players are available, kind of who is a top player of that game they pick, go through that way. You're not really roaming around a locker room. So in terms of, I've been at some games, most times at home recently, and it's been super different, but, good in terms of, getting access to where you need to. Everything's recorded. You're not missing anything. So if you need to, used to be going back from one locker room to the other, especially if it's not a highly covered game or something like that, where you don't have a lot of reporters at a game, but you can kind of help each other out, going from the LeBron locker room with the Lakers and running back to the Nets locker room and making sure that you get Durant or whoever. You're not really missing anything. Most teams are recording everything. archiving it on their media websites now. It's just become super easy to access everything. So that's been good. But definitely no more, you ask your questions that you ask, and, that's pretty much it for your night. You're not too many follow-ups warranted. The way that some of the teams give access is a little different. So, but overall, it's totally different not being at games either. I mean, I'm really not at as many games as I was. There was a time where I could be at 4 or 5 games a week. And it's, it's totally different. Even when I am at games, obviously it's just kind of doing this, sitting in a press box, watching a game, covering the game, taking down your notes, and, logging into the Zoom, and, you ask whatever questions you can, hopeful that other reporters that are, well seasoned and have been there a long time or are there every single day are asking the right questions too. And, figuring out your audio packages and your sound bites that way.
Talking with Mike Moriarty on the Off the Air podcast, WFUV alum, class of 2005. Let's get into your time at WFUV. Obviously, you got to do a ton of different stuff, covering games, basketball broadcasts, football broadcasts. I want to go back to when you first decided you were going to come to Fordham. We're recording this in early May. A lot of, high school seniors around now decide where they want to go to college. How much, if anything, did you know about WFUV, about the program at WFUV Sports when you made your decision to ultimately attend Fordham?
When I made my decision to attend Fordham, I knew it existed. I knew WFUV radio existed. I thought I wanted to be a sports writer. And I went, I applied to colleges kind of that way as well. I applied to Fordham too. My dad always told me about Fordham. Thought it was great. The only reason I really knew about the radio station was kind of two-pronged. I knew that they did sports because I heard, the first prong is that my dad listens to Kill the Gale, the Irish show on Sundays. So I knew that it existed that way. And then I knew, for whatever reason, the radio was on a Saturday. And I think it was either, I don't think I officially heard one-on-one, but I think I heard a report essentially from, I want to say it was from the Subway Series or something like that I knew. And I heard, I want to say it was maybe Andrew Bogus or something like that. Andrew Bogus, WFUV Sports as the tagline. I'm like, wait a second, this isn't like, somebody nationally at AP radio. This is somebody that works for WFUV and is at the Subway Series. Like, what is even going on there? And then I got into Fordham, started that first week of August in 2001. Saw the club fair, saw it on Eddie's Parade, and then just went from there. Went to the first workshop. And I knew that it existed. Again, I didn't know how far reaching it did exist in terms of what was available. I figured it was football, basketball, play-by-play, which that's pretty much, and some women's basketball games at that time was pretty much it in terms of Fordham game coverage. But then I had no idea about the beat reporter stuff at all, and how much Bob Aarons, which obviously everybody that does this show or has anybody from about the late 90s on has dealt with, and it has been our mentor and been terrific to all of us, given us the access. I mean, there's so many times that he fought for our access to games. I mean, you guys will know the history of even before I was there, getting, like one Mets credential a week or something like that. And now, you guys are traveling, covering the All-Star Game and World Series and things of that nature. But yeah, I didn't know, I guess, the far-ranging reach of WFUV Sports, but I knew somewhat about it. But I knew I wanted to do it once I realized that, I could be on the air or do something there when it was back on the third floor of Keating. So,
Mike, obviously in this industry, internships are such a big part of the experience, especially here in the New York area. Now, you mentioned to us that you were one of the first interns in that first intern class at Sirius XM Radio, which must have been crazy. But I'm curious, I want to ask you about, I think there's a lot of people who would think the future of sports media or any media in general was not in audio. But I think XM radio and podcasting really proved us all wrong on that.
Yeah.
That's something you noticed. Can you tell us about your experiences there?
When we, it was just it was a crazy experience to be there. And then we all basically stayed after too, did some sort of work after there. So it was, and everybody, I think, because everybody's still within the industry or sports industry. I mean, I'm myself, I do a regular, full-time business development job. And then I do this on the side and have, a beautiful wife and 4 beautiful daughters. So it's not I'm not Mike Breen, clearly, in terms of, the success that I've had with that. But everybody else that was a part of that intern class is still, Nick Costos was one of the first interns there. He obviously, he stayed on there for years and then did that. And now does his great shows with the gambling on radio.com. Nick Andrew, who I did a lot of work with. He's the head video guy for football at the University of Missouri. And Sean Butler is still at Sirius XM to this day. He's the executive producer for their NBA channel. So the success that I saw there was just, I'm not sure if there was a big investors or whatever, but the production value and the technology that they had on 2 floors on 6th Avenue and 49th Street was crazy in terms of so many different sound booths, so many different stations. Obviously, I think they were, aided by a couple big acquisitions like the different leagues and having all their play-by-play games and all that stuff, which is really what we kind of did at the start, and then helped out on talk shows, and then obviously gaining some big talk show names and things like that. But when it first launched, I thought it was just, kind of another thing. And it was certainly another thing in New York for us to do, whether as a free intern or eventually turn that into a small job or whatever we did. I was obviously open to it. The 4 of us, primarily, we worked at Sirius XM NFL radio. So that was what we did. And so that was kind of the sports tie-in with that. But I didn't foresee that. I guess it's now almost 20 years later that Sirius XM would be the giant that it is. And, still, and honestly, at that point, it was 2 different places, Sirius and XM, that were kind of competing. And now, 20 years later, for it to be in most people's cars, it to people, most people do listen to it or have some sort of access to it. And then, undoubtedly their recorded interview shows. And I mean, no matter what, the fingerprints of Sirius XM and satellite radio and radio in general are all over the podcasting, boom, that is currently taking place. So I didn't foresee, I didn't know, certainly didn't know what podcasting was back then, but I didn't foresee, this kind of, that basically that satellite radio would still be what it is today, and even so much bigger than it is. So
Certainly on in my car.
Something I'm really curious about is, especially considering how much national stuff you've done, what is the difference, would you say, between the New York media market and national media markets? Is it the fans? Is it just how big it is? What is it that makes New York so different?
It's the fans. It's, not every, now it's a little bit different because most cities do have a sports radio station. But certainly if you listen and you're on the road or anything like that, the passion is probably not as much. I mean, certainly the Northeast, New York, Philly, Boston, Chicago, some respect, people are still crazy rabid fans. I think, the amount of media, that's the biggest thing too in a locker room. Even on a random Yankees Tigers Thursday afternoon game, we got 20, 30 reporters, and this is obviously before COVID, but you're in a pregame, at least 15, probably 20, 25 reporters trying to chase who the next day's starter is. Hey, does Gardner have a twinged ankle? Whatever it is, and every small thing, every little notebook item, and the competition. I think, again, I was never a sports writer, but the competition that always seems to be, they're friendly, the writers that are there every day, but certainly they want to beat each other to, the punch in terms of the Post, Daily News, things like that. The national events are less, they're obviously bigger stage, but less intense in terms of, I think, questions, covering a major, again, WFUV gave us access, and Bob got us in to do live shows as 18, 19, 20-year-olds at the US Open Golf, right? I mean, it was crazy to even say that. We had our own booth. We did shows there all week. We did a live show on Saturday, and, you're sitting in interview rooms with Tiger Woods at the height of Tiger Woods. And, you're hearing questions asked. And again, they're very general questions, I think, in the national sense. The amount of, face-to-face access that you're getting is a lot different at a national event, even when the national event takes place here in New York, certainly, whether it's an all-star game, NBA, baseball, the Belmont, that sort of thing, different events that were there. But, I think the intensity for a New York fan, the New York media market, the thirst for every single piece of information on New York teams and things that take place in New York is great from the fans. But I think, in terms of the national, it's definitely a different, when I do work for, a lot of times I'll work for visiting cities that do come in, Chicago, Miami, Boston, things like that. You could just tell, which towns are really into what they need. And, the other towns that are just kind of like, okay, we just need some reaction from the game when, a town like Boston is totally like, we want this reaction from, we need to ask the coach this question, or we need to ask the manager this question. You can get an answer like that. So you could definitely tell, but it's really good experience. WFV allowed us to go to a lot of different things, both locally, obviously local games, national events. And even towards the end of my time at Fordham, we were going to basically everything. If you look at our summer schedule for some of our one-on-ones, it was crazy. What we were literally all summer, we'd be at either a U.S. Open tennis, golf, some PGA Tour event here, the Hall of Fame, just crazy about the Belmont, when it was a Triple Crown, things like that. So,
Mike, before we let you go, and this might sound a little corny, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. If you could go back and tell, 18-year-old you one thing as you went to Fordham, as you embarked on your journey at FUV and then throughout your professional career, what would it be? Whether it's advice, maybe, anything you do differently, what would that be?
Advice would be just to make sure that you get experience in everything. Make sure, and that has to do with radio, but also in general at Fordham, make sure that you experience a lot of things. Make sure that you enjoy your time, but work hard, study hard because it does matter. And, be able to really just do a good job, and know that you're kind of building the building blocks for what the rest of your both professional life, personal life will be. There's a lot of different interesting things that may happen and things like that. So I think advice would be to just make sure that you experience a lot of definitely professionally, a lot of different situations and a lot of different skills and techniques. And, just make sure that you make sure that you work hard, because you're going to end up having to work hard a lot in life. So you got to, while Fordham is awesome and fun and great in that respect too, and, socially and professionally, but it's a great, building block for the rest of your life. So, definitely a great place to be.
Mike Moriarty, game reporter, Metro Networks, AP Radio, CBS Radio, Fox Sports Radio, and a member of the WFUV fraternity from the class of 2005. Mike, thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it. Best of luck with everything going forward. And again, really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final hour of One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, continues as we take you up to the bottom of the hour and to 2 a.m. Andrew Posadas, Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo here with you, and it's time for another set of headlines. And I got a couple of here, 3 as a matter of fact, one based in the NFL, one interesting boxing one. And then before we end this segment and wrap it up, I do want to get to a nice tidbit about what happened in Major League Baseball yesterday that had nothing to do with the Mets or the Yankees. But guys, let's start first up there in Green Bay, Wisconsin, between the Packers and quarterback Aaron Rodgers. As we remember on draft night, the huge news was Rodgers and the report saying that he wants out of Green Bay and that he does not want to play another snap in a Green Bay Packers jersey. Well, the standoff continues this week, and former players and coaches continue to chime in. Former teammate John Kuhn, who former fullback who everyone loved saying and just cheering his name after catching a 4 or 5 yard pass not too long ago, he spoke on the radio on Friday, and he believes that there's, quote, somewhere around a 70 to 75% chance that Aaron Rodgers is the starting quarterback for the Packers this season. And, quote, former Packers head coach Mike Holmgren, he says that he's not impressed with how Green Bay has handled this situation, saying that they aren't handling Rodgers well and trying to keep their franchise quarterback happy. We've heard from Brett Favre, who was a former teammate of Aaron Rodgers, someone that Aaron sat behind as the backup quarterback. Brett Favre has said that his gut tells him that Aaron Rodgers will not play again for the Green Bay Packers. Jimmy, I'll start with you first. In your opinion, can Rodgers and the Packers salvage this relationship?
Well, before I answer that question, where did John Kuhn get that number? 70, 75%? What is he, like, predicting?
He's a math
rain?
whiz.
I don't know what he's doing. Look, I think Rodgers is done there. I don't think he wants to go back. I said it last week. I don't see this as a negotiating tactic. I don't see this as him, holding this as leverage against the Packers for a contract negotiation. I really think he wants out. And what will be interesting to watch in the coming weeks and months is you have one side, Aaron Rodgers, who really wants to get out and wants to, I think, do it sooner rather than later. And you've got another side in the Green Bay Packers that's saying, no, we are not trading him. We are remaining steadfast in our commitment to Aaron Rodgers. He's our starting quarterback, and he will be for years to come. So what it comes to, at least as I look at it, is will he at some point eventually withhold his services? Will he say, you know what? I'm not going back there. They're not trading me. I'm going to do what Le'Veon Bell did a couple years ago. I'm going to sit out. And I don't know if he will get to that point, but that's something to watch because he has, it seems, and he's not speaking publicly. He kind of had a pretty weaselly line, I thought, at the Kentucky Derby when he said that, I'm sorry that it got out at this particular time, which is, I guess, just a happy accident considering that the draft was literally 4 hours after that initial report. But I really don't think he wants to go back there. And I think going out there, doing what he has done, I think he leaked it personally. I mean, that story doesn't just get out. I mean, maybe Adam Schefter found it out entirely on his own. I don't know. He probably at least got nudged, if we're being honest. And look, that story doesn't get out from a guy who really wants to stay there. So I think he's done. Where he winds up going is odd because there's not an obvious fit to me. But I think he just so badly wants out of Green Bay that he will do that, by the way, whether he's playing in 2021 or not.
I think you really hit the nail on the head with specifically that last point, Jimmy. But yeah, I agree. I think Aaron is really just done with Green Bay. And to be honest, I can't really blame him just for the fact that they really have not done anything in the last, what was that, 10 years ago they won the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, they have done little to nothing to try and build around him to get there again. You let go of Mike McCarthy, sure, but not really much other than that, I would say. I think he really feels like, because let's be real, when it comes down to things, we talk about Peyton Manning, we talk about Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers is up there too. And the Green Bay Packers, I think a lot of the time don't treat him like that. And good on him for understanding where he is, his place in that, and for understanding that he can and should get out of that situation. Now, I think you made a really good point, Jimmy, because at first you think, oh, maybe there's nowhere really right for him to land right now, although I can think of a lot of teams that could replace their current quarterback with Aaron Rodgers and do better. But I think from the way it sounds, I think Aaron Rodgers will be much more willing, Andrew, to sit out 2021 than have to go play in Green Bay again.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if Jeopardy gives Aaron Rodgers a call and says, you know what, you don't even have to worry about, sitting at home doing nothing and not playing football, you can come in and it's not every day. I think Jeopardy, it's like a certain amount of period of time where they record all the episodes. So it's not time consuming for Aaron Rodgers. It's something that can put money in his pocket and also give him satisfaction. It looks like that's what he wants to do his career after football. Hosting Jeopardy is something that's realistically on the table. But I've heard all week and since the initial report came out, and everyone's kind of given the analogy of a relationship. And it's so correct in that way. If you treat your significant other wrong, if you don't take their input into account, if you don't listen to them, if you do things that they ask you not to do and you do it anyway over a decade's worth of time, then you can't be surprised when your significant other tells you they want out. They don't want to be in this relationship with you anymore. They want to find greener pastures elsewhere. And now Green Bay, their upper management saying, wait, what's going on? We thought it was all good. We're not letting you go. But if Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play for you, and knowing that you could potentially get a king's ransom for him, Jimmy, and some of the teams who might be willing to part ways and mortgage their future because they know if they add Aaron Rodgers, they're automatically in the conversation to win a Super Bowl. I think as time progresses, and also after June 1st, I believe, they take less of a cap hit if they were to deal Rodgers. So I think maybe Green Bay is also waiting for that deadline to pass so that it won't be a big of a hit on their cap space and their cap room moving forward if they ultimately part ways with Rodgers. But Jimmy, it's something that for Green Bay, they shouldn't be shocked on how things have unraveled and how they've unfolded. They have put themselves in this position, and this is their bed to lie in. And Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be good. He's leaving. If it's not football, it's going to be hosting Jeopardy or doing some sort of other venture, because as mundane as I think is quiet and relaxed, I think a lot of people don't love Aaron Rodgers' personality, but for some reason, he's someone that is going to get opportunities. It's just going to happen, whether it be Jeopardy or something else. So Jimmy, it's just Green Bay shouldn't be surprised at this. This was going to happen. This was in the making. And right now, you just can't be shocked or taken aback that Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to be there anymore.
There was a really good analogy the other day that Mina Kimes made on ESPN. She was talking about the Packers front office, and she likened it to the Wall Street madness from a few months ago, in that the Packers, after 2019, shorted Aaron Rodgers' stock, basically. They looked at him that season. His numbers were down. He did not look like the guy that we had come to know, or the guy that we saw in 2020. And they shorted the stock and they said, we need to go get a quarterback. And they traded up in the back of the first round for Jordan Love, who is not ready to play right now. Didn't get to play in any preseason games last year. So nobody knows what the Packers have in Jordan Love. The Packers don't know what the Packers have in Jordan Love, but they shorted the stock because they saw how Aaron Rodgers was playing, and Aaron Rodgers' 2020 season is roughly equivalent to the Reddit boys just launching GameStop to the moon, essentially. And now you have a guy in Aaron Rodgers who, maybe because the Packers drafted Jordan Love, goes out, has the best year of his career, wins MVP again. And now it's like, wow, okay, this guy's in the upper echelon of NFL quarterbacks again. And your bet in the short term may have worked with shorting the Aaron Rodgers stock, but in the long term, you have a guy who is possibly alienated to the point of no return with that front office. So I think short term, you got what you needed out of it. You kicked the field goal when you were down 8, which was disastrously bad for a number of reasons. A guy made fun of Aaron Rodgers for that on Jeopardy. He may have changed the NFL offseason. I don't know. But nonetheless, they shorted the stock. They lost. and now they're dealing with it essentially.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dylan.
Oh yeah, I just think it is absolutely. What world are we living in where we're having a conversation about an NFL quarterback where he might go? Aaron Rodgers of all people, too. You can rank him as high as you like in that top 10 of NFL quarterbacks, and that you can make an argument for it. And one of his potential options is to host Jeopardy.
I can't believe we're talking about Jeopardy in this context. It's like totally.
Yeah, I know
inbound.
Jimmy loves this right now.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and we all love Jeopardy. And it's great. I'd love to see Aaron Rodgers host Jeopardy. I would love to see someone from the sports world, just in general, host Jeopardy. I think it would be fantastic. It would make the contestants not knowing sports questions much funnier.
Yeah,
but that is beside the point. I think Jimmy made a lot of really good points, pointing out Mina Kimes' analogy about the stock market. It's incredibly similar. But I just think that there's a certain level of real disrespect the Packers showed Aaron Rodgers. Man, you have one bad season in 2019, and all of a sudden, everyone's going to turn on you. You are a generational quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. This is it. It really upsets me for his sake, quite frankly, that he's being treated like this.
Yeah, I mean, you go almost a decade drafting a defensive player in the first round, and the minute you decide to go offense, you draft Aaron Rodgers' replacement down the line. Again, there's that that classic saying, you never know what you have until it's gone. And for Green Bay, that realization is going to come sooner rather than later, as it seems that Aaron Rodgers is on his way out. Guys, let's get another headline in, and let's move over to the boxing world, or at this point, it's just the entertainment world. On Friday, former pound-for-pound king Floyd Mayweather Jr., he was in Miami. He's stepping back into the ring to fight YouTube sensation, I guess that's what you'd call him now, boxer Logan Paul on June 6th. It will be at Hard Rock Stadium. Both camps were there for a news conference, but that was not the biggest deal. After that news conference, Jake Paul, Logan's younger brother, got into an altercation with Mayweather, which prompted Jake to snatch Mayweather's hat in almost a chokingly manner and try to run off with it. And that basically ignited a mini scrum between both camps. And there was video giving you all angles on social media, just a bleep show in its finest hour. Dylan, let me start with you. How serious should we be taking this fight? And more importantly, Dylan, is this quote unquote fight detrimental for the sport of boxing?
You might want to unmute yourself again. That might be a thought.
Done it again.
Dylan.
Oh man. That is. Oh God. Mute me once, shame on me. Mute me twice.
We'll get muted again.
But because here's the thing, I can understand. It's really complicated because I can understand why people think this is detrimental to boxing, but at the same time, boxing has a problem because it is not a sport that has really entertained the young masses in a very extended period of time. I come from a family that really loves boxing, but this is a serious issue if boxing wants to sustain itself here in the 21st century, and as we move forward in the decades. They're gonna have to play to audiences, and this is certainly not the audience of me that they're playing to, and having either of the Pauls be involved. It's nothing against them. It's not really my thing, I guess. But I can understand why people think this is a detriment to the sport, but nevertheless, the sport needs to do something to keep people entertained. But boxing has a lot of trouble marketing itself. And if they need to do some kind of plastic fight in order to get people involved, like they did Mayweather-McGregor, then you know what? I'm all for it.
It's weird because I think about boxing in the last 20 years, and the most anticipated fight of my life was Mayweather-Pacquiao in 2015. They finally got it. They've been working on it for years. And what happens in the fight? It's terrible, right? Mayweather's just playing defense basically the entire time. Pacquiao couldn't really keep up. He wasn't the fighter he was 5-10 years before, and you could tell. And people felt like they didn't get their money's worth. I didn't actually watch that fight. A bunch of my friends did. They were talking about it for days. They were really excited about it. And Mayweather just kind of did what he does. And it was a really, frankly, boring fight that people didn't like. And then the next big fight after that, unless I'm skipping one, was Mayweather-McGregor. And McGregor's not a boxer. I mean, he took Mayweather to, the 10th round or something like that? And now you've got, Ben Askren was in a fight a few weeks ago. I could have sworn Nate Robinson was in a fight at some point. I think I have foggy memories of this stuff where I want to convince myself it's not real, but it's real. And it's Andrew, when you were reading that, I was just laughing the whole time. Floyd Mayweather is fighting a random guy on the internet. I never thought I'd see the day, but here we are.
No, this is. Taylor Twellman said it best. What are we doing? This is a killer. I hate that Logan and Jake Paul have gotten enough fame where they can headline boxing fights and make money that way. I hate that Floyd Mayweather Jr., somebody who is, whether you like him or not, the stuff he's done out of the ring, in the ring, he's one of the greatest boxers of all time. For him to kind of stoop down and take the money and fight Logan Paul, that just goes to show me that Floyd, he could fight again, but he's not going to fight one of these young, hungry contenders because he doesn't want to lose that 0 in his perfect record. So he'd rather do this exhibition and gain some more money in his pocket. I don't hate you for that, Floyd. But when I think about my dad and the VHS tapes that he has somewhere in our basement and some of the fights that he has there, Julio Cesar Chavez and Meldrick Taylor, Tyson Spinks, Hagler Hearns, Hagler Leonard. My dad grew up loving boxing. And now when he sees stuff like this, to him, it's just, he'd rather just go watch MMA, mixed martial arts, the UFC, what Dana White's doing. They put the best fighters together to fight each other consistently. Boxing does not do that. Top Ranked, Showtime, all of you guys, PBC, all of you guys are punks. You don't want to put your best boxers to fight each other. Oh, because I don't want him to lose his perfect record. If he has one loss, it's over. Hogwash. Have the best fighters fight the best fighters. If not, everyone's going to be done with boxing, and MMA is going to take the world by storm, as it's already doing right now. It's only going to get more popular. Boxing is heading down a dark path, at least for baseball. They can kind of get out of it if they want. They can get out of their own way and make it more entertainable. That's not even a word. More entertaining for the younger demographic. But for boxing right now, in this path, it's going to be a sport that we're going to look at and say, oh my God, people watch boxing? Well, who watches that anymore? It's sad to see. And I'll leave it at that because, guys, I want to get one more headline in, and it's a baseball one. I didn't mention this early on in the show, but Wade Miley from the Cincinnati Reds, he threw a no-hitter on Friday night. It's already the 4th no-hitter in Major League Baseball this season. And I know everyone's thinking, wow, what was the max, Andrew? Well, that's easy to tell you because the most no-hitters in an MLB season is 8. Back in 1884, and I know everyone's saying, Andrew, what were people doing in 1884? Well, I'll tell you this. The first long-distance phone call happened in 1884, and do you want to know who it was between? A person from Boston and a person from New York, and you can imagine they were not talking Yanks or Red Sox even 137 years ago. So, Jimmy, real quickly, and let's just go around the table. 4 no-hitters already this season. Do you think that record of 8 no-hitters in a season, is that record in jeopardy?
Could be. And obviously it's on pace. And, I think that part of it is early season. Like the offenses are usually a little down in April and early May just because of the weather around the country. And once things warm up, I think maybe the offenses might warm up a bit too. But we're seeing, this season is teetering towards 1968 in baseball where they deaden the ball a little bit. And now you just have anarchy, basically, where, nothing against Wade Miley, but I never really thought he'd be throwing a no-hitter. So I think it could be. I think it could be because you only need, let's figure it out here. You only need 1 a month for the rest of the season to tie it. You can come up with one hitter in a month. Yeah, it could happen. So I think It's hard not to say that with the way things have started.
Yeah, I do think they're going to tie it, and to be honest, I kind of really hope they do. I love good pitching years. I think it's so cool. I think there's a lot of baseball fans that when they're really young, all they want to see is home runs. I was like that. I'm sure you guys are both like that. And we mentioned this way early in the show, but to remember that for pitching to be the cool thing is really entertaining to watch, because we're always going to love home runs, and there's always going to be home runs. It's always going to be entertaining and fun. But when good pitchers are pitching really well, and when even not the best pitchers like Wade Miley, again, no offense to him, but not a guy we would expect to throw a no-hitter. When they're throwing and it's this good, it is so entertaining. When pitchers and hitters are both at the top of their game, which I honestly think they are right now, because people talk about a year like 1968 where there was so little offense, the pitchers were so dominant. But like maybe averages are down this year, but home runs aren't that far down. I mean, this is just a time in baseball where the things we love to see the most, which are great starting pitchers and great home run hitters, are all doing their thing, and it's fantastic.
I mean, we're on pace for 21 this year. I mean, that's absurd. It's not going to happen. If it does, I mean, I think we'd all have our jaws to the floor, but it's hard to say. I think there's a good possibility we tie it, but again, we could go the next 3 months without a no-hitter. That's how drastic it could flip. And I think the warm weather might help out, hitters. I think that might help out and have offenses, producing more. But, it's crazy to see. And I think a lot of people want baseball to be more fast-paced and more offense. But I think sometimes the best games are those when you're just seeing a pitcher locked in and there's no offense. And it's just a magical ride from the first to the ninth inning if you can get there. So I don't think so. I mean, there's a good chance they might tie it, but no, I don't see them breaking the record. But Jimmy, it's 2 in 1 week. We've had 4 already. It's absolutely, and you mentioned it, last year, everyone thought the balls were juiced. This year, nobody is coming to that conclusion. Pitchers are having their way, and you got to hope that as we progress into the summer, that offenses start to warm up, and we may not see another no-hitter again this season.
Even the Padres got one. That's when things are a little bit crazy. All right, coming up next, last 18 minutes to the show here. We're just going to talk. Dylan, Andrew, and I coming back one-on-one. New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Our final segment coming up after this. We'll be right back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back on one-on-one, last 15 minutes here in the East. It's 1:45 a.m. Hope all of you are doing well, staying safe on this 9th of May, 2021. So Dylan, Andrew, and I, and our producer, Alex, as well. I don't know if he's joining us for this segment or not. We'll figure it out. But we all, in addition to doing WFUV, we write, or in my case, wrote for the Fordham Ram. And we had a podcast, and we talked about a lot of stuff. We never actually wrote it all down. We just hit the button and talked and didn't really have an idea where it was going, to be honest. But it was fun. It was good. And so I'm going to throw out some topics for you guys. And Dylan and Andrew, I know you're here. Alex, you can join in as well if you'd like. A bunch of different topics. I'm going to randomize this here. Okay, so I have a bullet point list of things that we can get into here. And I'm just going to pick one here. All right, let's go the second to last one on my list that I think is a fascinating point. So we were talking at our pre-production meeting the other night about the evolution of the game of basketball. Michael Jordan, LeBron James. And we were thinking about, who would be Michael Jordan in a present era of the NBA. Came up with a number of different names and, a number of interesting names, some of whom I thought worked, some of whom maybe not, mostly coming out of my mouth. But for LeBron James, we tried to think who would be LeBron James in a previous era, and we couldn't. And there's more than one of those there. Andrew, I guess I'll go to you first on this one. What do you make of all this? I feel like it's a fascinating conversation and one that, we've had on our own a number of times that I think people talk about the evolution of the game, but it's really been striking what we've seen in the last few years.
Jimmy, it's interesting because when we when we threw out the idea of, who in today's game reminds us of Michael Jordan, we were quick to say, Kawhi Leonard, even DeMar DeRozan with how he operates in his mid-range game. But then when we turned it around to who does LeBron remind you of from previous decades, previous eras, I can't think of one. He is in that rarefied air where he's a unicorn. And I'm not saying that Michael Jordan couldn't play in every era, but Michael Jordan's game, there are guys in today's game, like a Kawhi, who they've kind of patented their game after MJ. But for someone like LeBron, he kind of reminds me of Kareem, Wilt Chamberlain. I mean, these guys are unicorns or a Kevin Durant even, where you could have thrown them anywhere, the 1950s, the 60s, whatever, and they would have been able to revolutionize the game and change the game no matter what. There'd be nobody like them at all. No matter what decade you dropped them, there would be no basketball player that you could realistically look at and says, that player reminds me of him. It's just, I think that's a dynamic where LeBron fans can say, well, that's why LeBron's better than MJ, because he is a unicorn, because he could have played anywhere, because his game is really a bit more revolutionary in what he can do as a passer, as a scorer, and then when he wanted to in the first half of his career as one of the better defenders in the league. So, Jimmy, it's interesting to look at when you kind of compare eras. But, for those, who may not be the biggest LeBron supporters, I mean, you can't deny that, no matter where you place LeBron in the history of the National Basketball Association, Dylan, I just have to imagine he would have dominated the same way, and he would have had just as similar, if not bigger impact if he were, playing in the 1960s. And think about it, with civil rights and how life was back then. I mean, LeBron has been that philanthropist. I just cannot imagine an era that LeBron James wouldn't have dominated on and off the court.
He has been a timeless piece for the NBA, both on the court and off, like you just mentioned there. But yeah, to your point, he's just so incredibly unique that it's almost impossible to find someone who is, I wouldn't even say just like on par with him, who just like is comparable to him. It's not even just a level of being the greatest or anything. It's just, he's just so incredibly different. And something we talked about the other night that I find so fascinating is that, you talk about, he starts out in his career, he's one of the best defenders in the league. I would argue that was a point in the league when defense mattered a little bit more, at least in a more physical kind of way. And as the league has evolved, LeBron has evolved as well, to a point where it's almost kind of difficult to see whether the LeBron evolved with the league or in reverse, the league evolved with LeBron. It could really be either one, but that's just a testament to how good he is and how unique he is. And you could throw him in any era 50 years before us and probably 50 years into the future. And he's going to maybe not be the best player in the league, maybe not, who knows, but he'd be just fine. And I'm very curious to know the opinion of our friend and our producer, Alex Walls.
Get in here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, gentlemen. It's a pleasure. Here's what I actually think about this. It's kind of a different perspective. I want to broaden it beyond just LeBron James because I'm kind of a hypocrite in this conversation when it comes to the evolution of basketball because you guys all know who my favorite player is, Steph Curry. I also criticize the amount of threes they shoot in the NBA today. And I'm of two minds about this. On one hand, I think the game has become so much more exciting. It's become so much more offensively driven. You're seeing all the scores, you're seeing the high-scoring games, you're seeing all the excitement, the star players, all that's still there. But there's a grittiness, and there's something about that older basketball that Jordan was a part of that we don't see anymore. And there's always that fascinating question about how would LeBron fare in another era, or how would Jordan fare in this era? And I don't really want to entertain that because I think it's kind of a waste of our time. But I think there's been an energy about the NBA when it comes to the physicality that's kind of been lost. And we're seeing a lot of threes, we're seeing a lot of arrogance, we're seeing a lot of fun. I think the NBA is heading in a really interesting direction. And Steph Curry, my favorite player, is a big reason for that. You know, a lot of people say he ruined the game. A lot of people say he changed the game. I wonder who's going to be the next guy to do something similar. Because LeBron has never had, nobody's ever said that about LeBron. We've talked so much about how he's evolved with the game of basketball, but we've never seen it in a negative light. Whereas other guys, I think, have had that conversation about them. So it's so interesting about LeBron, how he's seamlessly evolved over the decades and over the years to be in that championship conversation every year, even though the game has changed, but he's not necessarily the guy that did it. He only evolved with it. So I think it's just a very interesting conversation that you guys bring up here for sure.
Think about guys who have just come in and fundamentally altered the way the game is played. You think through the history of the league, Magic, Kareem to an extent. You could say that about LeBron to some sort of extent, but Curry is right up there because if you watch the NBA 5 years ago, it's nothing like what we're seeing even now. Like teams take threes, but not like this. And I think that also part of it goes back to analytics as well. And Wolves, I know you hate analytics. We were talking the other day, and you startled me out of nowhere. We were talking about analytics. You were like, "Oh yeah, I can't stand him. Hate him."
You're correct. I think it depends on the sport. This is what I always say. Baseball, let's start with baseball. You brought up a great point earlier in the show about expected batting average, right? I think that's something you could look at, really fascinating. And in the Yankees press conference, is something I found really interesting is you listen to Garrett Cole, and he talks about the amount of information that pitchers have, and they can use that to their advantage. And I think that's a lot of why, as you guys mentioned, you're seeing pitchers almost dominate the game today because of the amount of information that's presented to them. Basketball, analytics should not play a part in it whatsoever. And the reason I say that, you guys know this, I feel like, Andrew, you're nodding your head here. It's a game about stars. It's a game about talent. The Brooklyn Nets can use whatever analytics they want. If you don't have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, you're going nowhere. If the Golden State Warriors don't have Steph Curry, you're not going anywhere. You can use, I think, whatever analytics you want to justify how to play the game of basketball. But if you don't have the guys that can put that ball in the net, I don't think it necessarily matters. If anything, it can generate marginal differences. And I think, using an analytic here or there, it could help your team. But if you're relying on that to win, I don't think you can ever do it. And I think the Rays in the World Series last year, you pull your star when it matters most. It's all about stars. That's what's going to win you games, not the analytics. They might get you there, but they're never going to put you over the hump in my mind.
I completely agree with you, Alex. I think in basketball, there are certain stats, when you're game planning for a certain team in the postseason and it's going to be a 7-game series, maybe there are some analytics that you kind of want to focus on in terms of game planning against a team's offense or defense. But the way, Dylan, in baseball, that analytics is really taking a stranglehold where teams are basically, they're not in love with, they're using analytics almost in fear, not because they love it and they feel like it's revolutionizing the game. They're using it because they know if they don't, other organizations are going to take advantage of them and you're going to end up at the bottom of the barrel because that's just what it is. But I would also say this, some teams haven't been all in. I mean, the Rays last year, they were not a team where everyone thought, they were analytics driven heavily. They had one of the worst payroll, the lowest payroll in Major League Baseball. So for some teams, and even with the Dodgers, we don't hear the Dodgers on their side saying that they're heavily analytical. We're hearing it from teams like the Yankees, right here, a team like the Yankees where you wouldn't think analytics would play a big part. It's really more about the money and what they can do in bringing in stars, as Alex mentioned. But the way baseball has really just been crippled by analytics and dependent on it, Dylan, it just seems to me like that's kind of hindering the game a bit and trying to open it up to gain more fans.
Yeah, absolutely. What I think it actually does more than anything, specifically in terms of fatigue and use of players, is that managers and hitting coaches and pitching coaches are so obsessed about getting just the perfect matchup. They'll bring a pitcher or even a hitter in just for one at bat. And what you end up doing is you're only using a guy for one at bat, and then you lose him for the rest of the game. And eventually you're going to have to expand the rosters, which are already rather big in itself. And you already have 12, 13 pitchers on the rosters anyway. And it just becomes too much. So I think eventually what's going to happen is either the rosters are going to expand, which I don't think should happen, or it's all just going to explode and they're going to end up back at square one again. Kind of like a big bang of the universe, as Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson might say. But yeah, what I think what is interesting about baseball is that Pete Alonso mentioned something during a Mets press conference the other day that was very interesting. He was talking about analytics and sabermetrics, and he talked about how it can really be an advantage for pitchers, like we've talked about. But for hitters, if you get up to the plate and you're thinking, oh, my expected batting average is this, specifically against left-handed pitching, then maybe I can hit it this way, and you're out immediately. He's in your head. The pitcher has gotten into your head, and he's won. So that's something really important. I think in basketball, like you mentioned, it's so much more about talent. I mean, you look at a guy like Steph Curry, and that, he can revolutionize the game, but, and you think maybe anybody can just start playing differently. But do you realize how good you have to be to revolutionize the game? I can't just come and start shooting threes and expect to change the game of basketball. You have to be really good at it. So, analytics has its place. I think you're very right. And Jimmy, I'm sure you agree with this.
Yeah, I do. And I just wonder what Donnie Stevenson thinks of the analytics in baseball. That's who I want to hear from.
I wonder what the rat thinks.
Yeah, what was the expected batting average on the rat infestation? And yeah, oh my God. But in all seriousness, I think it does have a place. I use analytics in baseball kind of like on a show like this. I will look into certain players just to make sure that it confirms what I'm seeing, right? I watched Francisco Lindor for the first month of the season, and I can tell you this guy's hitting ground balls. He's not hitting balls hard. His at-bats look bad. And I go to the analytics, and it confirms that. But I watched it, so I know. And I've seen him play, and I've seen him not hit the ball hard enough to know. I've never once, when watching Steph Curry pull up from just in front of half court, never once thought, well, what's the true shooting percentage on that one? No, I don't. I'll go back and look at it, right? And I think there's a place for that, but I never think about it in game. I never think about, okay, well, what are the probabilities of whatnot? I was watching a couple weeks ago, ESPN did a StatCast broadcast, and I liked it. But every time what they would do in the late innings was that Dodgers-Padres game where the Padres came back late. They were down like 7-1. They did the win expectancy, and it was insane. It was up and down, and I was like, well, yeah, that's what happens when you have a game that goes back and forth that many times. So sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is really useful, but like win expectancy, for example, like what does that mean? That's not useful to me. So there's certain analytics I like, and then there's certain analytics I'm just like, I could live without.
I'm with you there. There's something about sports that you can never take away. Francisco Lindor, maybe he was going to hit a home run yesterday. Maybe he wasn't. An analytic won't tell you that, and you can only use them in their place. I think that's well said and a good note for me to end on. I got to get my licks in here, Jimmy, so I appreciate it.
Yes, you do. We got to get you on the show more often.
Hey, I'm just doing my job, Jimmy. Just doing my job.
They got to do like everything else. But.
I've been pushing Alex. I mean, producers on other shows, and we talked about this the other night, they chime in, and Alex has way too much knowledge for him to be back there just pushing buttons. I won't have it, Jimmy and Dylan. I just won't have it.
Well, he's just so generous. He just wants to see his friends shine and give their opinions, and that's well appreciated. But excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts, and I'd like to hear them.
How dare you not give us your thoughts?
15 minutes a show. I'll take that. I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Great. Well, I wouldn't say he's pushing buttons. He's really commanding NASA from Fordham, but good enough. Anyways, guys, fun show as always. This has been a blast. Sports director of WFUV, Bobby Chaffardini. Special thanks as always to our guests, Nelson Figueroa and Mike Moriarty. You can catch those full interviews on WFUVsports.org and YouTube as well, posted by our own Alex Walls. Until then, for my partner, Dylan Balsamo, Andrew Posadas with the headlines, Alex Walls, our producer, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. So long, and thank you for listening to The One-on-One.